Yeah, that's the projector. I don't think the people at home are seeing it that way.
We had a laser light show.
It does. Hopefully nobody triggers any epileptic.
Maybe we get the fire alarm going at the same time. I really feel like we're at
Like strobe lights and
uh
evening. Alrighty, good evening. Welcome everyone to the Monday, July 15th work session. Wanted to call the meeting to order. Cindy, could you do roll call, please?
Sure, Mayor. Ms. Connolly? Here. Ms. Lynn? Here. Ms. Leon?
Here.
Ms. Hiscott?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
Ms. Underhill?
Here.
Mayor Hardy?
Here.
Thank you.
Before we jump into the agenda, with Caroline's permission, we are going to wish her a happy birthday. And thank her for celebrating it with us tonight. Way to exemplify public service, so thank you. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
I did not bake cakes, I'm sorry.
I don't need cakes.
I did bake a loaf of zucchini bread. If you like zucchini bread, that's just not much of a birthday cake, though. Okay, well, let's get started on our work session items.
So our first item is a briefing for the City Council on feedback that we've gotten through the Board and Commission review on the ordinance to amend the zoning code to exclude the first 1,000 square feet of new commercial use off-street parking requirement calculations. I want to note that in the request on the agenda, it says review and preparation for first reading on July 22nd. That's not correct. Council's already given first reading back in May, and so this is a review and preparation for second reading at your meeting on August 12th. And we have gotten Board and Commission comment, and there are some policy issues that we'd like to tee up, and Jack Trainer will give us the staff report to tee those up for the City Council. We'd like to see if there's consensus on some of those questions, and then we would prepare the documentation for second reading for the August 12th meeting. Mr. Trainer.
All right, thank you, Mr. Shields. Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of Council. As Mr. Shields said, Council is requested to hold a work session tonight on proposed zoning ordinance amendment to reduce commercial parking requirements for the first 1,000 square feet of space in existing commercial buildings. Council granted first reading to the proposed change on May 28th, 2024, and final consideration for this item is scheduled for August 12th, 2024. Council's further requested to review recommendations from city boards and commissions that the commercial use area exempt from parking requirements be increased above the 1,000 square feet that council granted first reading to. Next, I'll go over a couple updates to this report since council's first reading, beginning on line 22. Staff edited the first line in the draft code for clarity that the proposals that all new non-residential uses would be eligible for decreased parking requirements that meet specific criteria when applying for a certificate of occupancy. Those criteria have not changed, which are, again, that the use can already have a parking reduction on the books, meaning a transportation demand management plan or a parking management plan, that the parking requirements are calculated through the through square feet in the zoning ordinance, and that the use is not within a shopping center. On lines, beginning on line 31, we've included a summary of those boards and commissions that have reviewed the proposal, including the Planning Commission, the Economic Development Authority, the Falls Church Chamber of Commerce, and the Citizens Advisory Committee on Transportation. The Environmental Sustainability Council is set to have their work session this Thursday at their July meeting. As mentioned earlier, the Economic Development Authority and the Greater Falls Church Chamber of Commerce both recommended separately to vote for a proposed increase to the commercial area that would be exempt, and again is something that staff is looking for discussion on tonight and direction. Included on line 55 is a comment response table that summarizes the discussions that council and the Planning Commission have had on this item to date. I'm happy to talk about any specific response in more detail, but I'm going to keep going for now. Into the background section, beginning on line 82 under the current parking utilization. Kind of at the beginning, actually, yeah, line 93 is where the changes start. We've pulled some more kind of relevant information from the Walker Consultants parking study that's included in its entirety as its own attachment, which kind of gives some more clarity about the parking utilization that was observed when the counts were done, both in the private and public parking spaces in the city. On line 99 is a kind of table, a helpful table, breakdown in hourly blocks that shows what those parking utilization rates were. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. I just want to mention that moving into the staff analysis section, beginning on line 144, we've updated each of the examples that were given in the previous report with a comparison column of what the new parking regulations would be under that 1,200 exemption number that the EDA and the chamber both voted on. So that's there for comparison of the 1,000 square feet that, again, council referred out. And now, if we move into the staff findings section on line 207, and here actually, Sophie, could I ask you to pull up one of the attachments is the existing conditions parking? Yeah, perfect, thank you. So I wonder if we can get a little closer. There we go. So one of the asks that staff heard across the Planning Commission and council was for some maps, and so we've included two different maps. This one has the most content in it, so I'll walk through it a little bit. Shown here are all the city's commercial buildings. In orange are the eligible buildings under the proposal, and then in light and dark gray are non-eligible buildings depending on their disqualifying factor, being, again, either a shopping center or having a TDM or parking management plan on file. Also shown here are 3 public garages in the center of town. 2 that are existing or operating today are the Kaiser garage to the north, right? And then just south along that, along Maple Avenue is the George Mason Square garage. And then the Broad and Washington garage is set to deliver next quarter with 60 new spaces. So in total, these 3 garages comprise 440 public parking spaces. And the kind of ring buffers in that kind of purple hue that you see is a quarter-mile radius around each parking garage, which is a kind of common yardstick about the distance folks tend to be willing to walk to park. And we calculated that 43% of the eligible commercial buildings are within that a quarter mile of all of these garages. Also shown here is on-street parking restrictions. Those are the kind of blue vein-like lines that you see on the map. This include residential permit parking or other just flat hourly rate restrictions in commercial areas. I think it's 2-hour parking. There's also 4-hour parking in other parts of the city. So these are all the inventory that we have of existing on-street parking restrictions. And then lastly, kind of going back to the Walker Consultants study, those different colored blocks in the middle of town was the study area that the study looked at, and each color denotes a different parking utilization rate at the peak hour during the weekday that the study was done. So green shows that the weekday peak hour private parking utilization rate was less than or equal to 50%. Yellow is between 51% and 64% full. Orange was between 65 and 85% full, and then red was greater than or equal to 85%. So I'm happy to answer any more questions or clarifying questions or anything about this map. But to get back to the report, I'll just wrap up by kind of going over the public engagement Schedule, again, beginning on line 251. So following council's first reading in May 28th, staff's gone to the Economic Development Authority. The Planning Commission held a work session. The Falls Church Chamber of Commerce also held a work session, and the CACT had a work session most recently on June 12th. The Environmental Sustainability Council, again, is holding their work session this week on Thursday. And the Planning Commission is scheduled to hold their public hearing August 7th, with City Council final consideration scheduled for August 12th. And I'll end my presentation there. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jack. I'm disappointed nobody else liked the 50-cent reference as much as Jack and I did. Okay, who's got questions or comments for Jack? Mary Beth?
In looking at the map, gosh, I've already forgotten that. Already out of the habit. In looking at the map, I was surprised to see that newer buildings like the it looks like the Hilton Garden Inn and the Flower Building are eligible buildings, but they have a shared parking agreement among themselves. That the Flower Building has spaces that are so how could we reduce it further? Does that not count as a TDM or?
Yeah, that may have been one that we missed, but the criteria is any building with an existing parking reduction commonly in the transportation demand management or parking management plan would be ineligible.
I don't
for
know
further
that one
reduction.
has an official TDM. I think when it was built, it was by right, but the developer knew that there wasn't enough parking and also had access to the Hilton Garden Inn parking. So that there is parking that takes place at the Hilton Garden Inn. So I don't know what the wording would be to ensure that that kind of building would also be included.
So it was a parking agreement that came about after approval, and
It was
Really?
that, no. It was just that the building was by right. There was no approval of it. So there was no requirement for it to have a TDM. But the owner of the building also was the owner of the parking lot where the Hilton Garden Inn was built. So when the Hilton Garden Inn was built, he arranged that there would be guaranteed parking for the Flower Building.
I see.
So there is not enough parking at that building right now. If you counted it for all of the people in there, they have to use the Hilton Garden Inn. So that one is just one that is a concern. And then my other one is if you can go over the part about if there's more than one working unit in the building, does this apply to the whole building or just to each business in the building?
Specific businesses.
So if there's a building that's 1,200, or if there's an office that's 1,200 square feet, and there's a lot of offices that are 1,200 square feet, then there's no parking requirement for the whole building?
So the proposal is tied to certificates of occupancy, so specific uses, but the uses have to be within eligible buildings. And so those buildings, one, have to be existing. So, new construction would still go through the site plan process, would have, all the regulations that are on the books today. So as part of that CO process, staff would, look up, obviously, the building records and see whether there's any disqualifying criteria attached to it, like an approved parking reduction already on there.
Right. Okay. That one just concerns me that we're not looking at the whole building. We're looking at individual units that could then add up to a lot of space being rented, but all of it being disqualified. That's.
And then as I look at this map, there's some other ones that I'm just surprised to see are on here. So, like the, I don't even know what all of them are, but it just seems like there's a lot on here that I didn't expect to see as fitting into this ordinance.
But so in the one example that was cited, so the Flower Building, let's assume it does have a written shared parking agreement. In that case, if one of the office spaces came in for a CO for a change in use, no longer an office, but some other kind of use, because there's a shared parking agreement, that building still would not be eligible for this ordinance.
That's right, that's right. Yeah, any written parking reduction already on the books would be disqualifying.
That's good.
So that's one building that you expressed a concern on. Okay.
But if we look at some of these buildings, and I'm trying to figure out which ones they all are, it looks like the Atlantic building on the corner of Broad and Washington is an eligible building. And how does that, there's so many different units in that building. Yeah, 150 South Washington is there and others.
Yeah.
I really thought we were talking about very small buildings, that there really couldn't be that much else there. So this kind of, seeing that whole map just gives me a little pause.
Right. So I know it's like, again, this would apply to individual uses. So even though a building has a lot of individual units in it, there's already existing parking on site for those units. And so this proposal still would disproportionately benefit the smallest buildings where you have one, maybe two tenants, probably already with, parking that's to the code today, which is, a lot.
I think what you're saying is that for the large buildings where you might have the scenario where, let's say, 10 different users all apply for this, that likelihood is pretty small compared to the small individual buildings that might have one use that currently has a barrier to opening something, right? Is that kind of what you're getting at for like the big buildings?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
Oh, so I guess have you guys run like a sort of a worst case scenario, or what could go wrong here? Is my question, because it seems like a very good idea, but what could go wrong?
Well, there's always, concern brought up about parking overflow, right? Which is why we showed where the existing parking regulations are today, and residential permit parking remains an option at all times. We've included in the staff report is kind of the process for requesting new parking regulations, but we do think that there is a lot of public parking that isn't being used efficiently. So part of the remedy to that too might be improved wayfinding to public parking across the city, just kind of guiding people to where that existing available parking is to make better use of that, because the Walker report does show that parking utilization in these garages is drops pretty quick after that peak hour of 3 to 5 p.m. So that's another potential remedy that staff could look at if directed, is looking at the existing wayfinding and signage to get to public parking.
Dave?
Sure. Thanks a lot. So thanks a lot for the map. I too was in general agreement with the concept, but I'm looking at many more properties than I ever imagined that this would apply to. And so if you get a cluster of these properties, each reducing their parking at one time, you could create interesting spillover effect. So one of the things that I'd like us to explore is some sort of a kind of a public notice, some sort of a process that would require us to be fact specific, rather than just sort of a general grant, or a general grant that allows for some sort of review by the planning commission, or even an administrative review by the city staff, so that we're not inadvertently creating a major lack of parking that actually would have a negative impact on the local businesses as opposed to a positive impact. And then the spillover parking where there is an adequate alternative parking. So I'd look for something that would give us some more fact-intensive ability, maybe a general rule, but with some sort of an opportunity for a case-by-case review, because I'm looking at areas that are fairly long distance from public parking and clusters of them. So, but again, I like the general concept. And I'm wondering too if we might include some sort of an incentive to return the pavement to open space. That might be something that then would have an interesting addition as well. So I'm a little bit concerned about unintended consequences. Maybe that's the summary, and how we need to get a hold of that so we don't prevent creating problems in the specific application of what is otherwise a good idea. Thanks.
Thank you.
Erin?
So thank you for bringing this back, and it has a lot more information than it did when we first started looking at it. So I think it's helpful as we all sort of think about this, because I think there is general support for modernizing the parking, but concern about whether this proposal might be too blunt a tool to kind of achieve what it is that the objective is. Because when I was first kind of visualizing what we were trying to achieve, I was thinking more of like the Stratford site and the Gottfried site. And if you have whole buildings, right, that you're seeking to repurpose for another use, and how you activate a larger space, is the parking standing in the way to accomplishing a better use of that building overall. But now it seems like we've gotten to a point where we've moved away from that, or maybe something that's more of like a special use permit where you might be able to get kind of a closer look at what parking that proposed use might need given its surroundings, to a very highly specific, like slice and dice a building, and as different tenants come in and get certificates of occupancy, you can just start kind of shaving off parking requirements that exist. And I had the same concern kind of looking at the map as Mary Beth did, in terms of buildings that I'm not sure how this would apply to certain lots. So I guess I'll zoom out and say I have like 3 buckets of comments. One is just on the schedule. One is kind of on the information that we have that's going into the ordinance as we're thinking about it. And then the third one is kind of like on the application and the map. So just on the schedule, I said this earlier, initially at first reading, I think that this schedule is aggressive for what this is. And now looking at the map, there are something like almost 200 properties in play all throughout the city. And it might be that we need to take a closer look at like how this is going to play out in different zones even. I have some concerns. I watched the Planning Commission meeting on this, and I watched the CACT meeting on this. And I have some concerns that it was an extensive discussion before the Planning Commission, and yet only 4 out of 7 commissioners were present, and that the Planning Commission, needs to kind of take up that discussion, and we're not going to have the Planning Commission's recommendation or have a further work session before we're scheduled for second reading. So that's a concern that I have, given the conversations that were occurring around, special use, type permits, whether we are at the density yet that we can move away from kind of parking to the degree that this might maybe move us to. I had raised concerns about ADA requirements. As far as I understand them, if all the units within the building are small enough in turnover, you could end up with a building with no parking requirements, which would essentially mean you have no ADA requirements at all for that building. So that's a concern for me, unless we are going to take up building or, designating increased spots as disability spots for on-street parking. The CACT, from their meeting, I understood concerns about sort of overflow, as came up in the Planning Commission conversation, into streets and permit parking, and whether we want to be promoting increased permit parking in areas of the city. Like, I don't think we want to be pushing people into the resident requests for permit parking. And they also had questions about responsive pricing and whether we should be doing something, moving toward a metered, system that basically turns over availability in a way that we don't turn over availability, and is responsive pricing based on kind of where you have the densest use with the most frequent turnover, and as people are more willing to walk to something or take a bike or ride a scooter or use alternate transportation, that they're further away and you park in those areas and then you just walk, if you can, and the upside is you don't have to pay for parking. And then I do have concerns that we haven't kind of surveyed or canvassed the businesses, even though we have like a dense pocket of businesses that might be affected by this, that we could more easily kind of check on thoughts. On the information piece of it, I think the Walker study is helpful. I have concerns that it's outdated at this point. Like it's one day in January, one day in February 2020, pre-pandemic. And the study itself, you know, gave strategies that aren't kind of the strategies that we are looking at here in terms of how we might better utilize parking. And the study itself also, you know, said that from 2020, it would imagine an increase in parking utilization of like 3% each year till 2025. So we've already gone through 4 of those years, and then it increased, you know, annual up to 2030, at which point we might be saturated for our study area of that 23 blocks. And so I think that conditions have changed enough to warrant kind of taking a look at whether it makes sense to really rely on that study to reflect what current conditions actually are, and especially in a post-pandemic environment. On the Fayetteville, Sandy Point kind of comparisons, I looked at some of their plans a little bit more and saw that they had, you know, downtown parking plans. And so it was, you know, work that their councils or governing bodies had taken up to actually, they have like downtown maps where they show the different, you know, city parking and available lots, and how they've done responsive pricing in different areas, or how they have one side of the street is like, you know, public parking, but the other side of the street is permitted parking, so that it's not just giant, you know, permitted zones, right? So, you know, again, just concerns about whether we're using a very blunt tool here in a very short period of time, and whether it's going to achieve what I think we all want to achieve as kind of better parking utilization, and maybe freeing up some spots that might be better used or could be, you know, better shared parking if current businesses that have off-street parking would actually like share them, like we would prefer they do. And then I had some questions like Mary Beth, just in terms of buildings like, you know, where Clay Cafe to the Zoya's is, like the, you know, whatever that is, the 200 block of Broad Street, the little shopping center with the congested parking behind it, where Northside Social is, and then you have like 116 to 1 something, Rare Bird, Clay Cafe, Lemon Lane, all of those, you know, that shows up the same way that the like Mr. Brown's and next door shows up. And so I don't understand how this works for those sorts of buildings. Like when the florist flipped over to Stylish Patina, does it mean that like the florist used to have parking, but Stylish Patina doesn't have to have parking? Like how does this actually get applied as tenants are switching leases? And does this have like a potential unintended effect between a tenant and a landlord, that you could actually drive out smaller businesses or independent businesses because it's more profitable for a landlord to not renew a lease because they free up parking, you know, by not doing so? Or you could have an entire lot that's suddenly free, and all your occupants, you know, have to figure out their parking situation, and you can like switch your parking lot into a private parking lot, right? Like, so there are all sorts of things in terms of like how this could potentially play out. One thing else that I will raise, and then I'm finished for now in terms of comments, but I think the map is helpful in all of us kind of recognizing which buildings are potentially eligible or maybe eligible. And I think looking at the map, I know that the EDA kind of took this up already and sent a recommendation. I think it would be worth sending this back to the EDA for it to take a closer look at what properties might be in play, and whether it should even amend its motion to reflect if like there are disclosures, for example, that are required because of any ownership interest in LLCs or income from LLCs or services rendered to LLCs that own these various parcels and in which any members may have an interest, that it would be worth raising that, similar to the 3 or more persons affected by a transaction. So to the extent that there are, disclosures that are required, even though a member could otherwise participate, that's clear in the public record, in terms of, transparency, objectivity, and still acting in the public interest among all of these otherwise affected properties. So I would ask for that to occur. I think it's worthwhile for it to occur.
Before we continue, I got an alert that the cable broadcast is showing an old planning commission meeting and not the live meeting. If we could address that. Sorry. Just thought that we should be. Thank you, Cindy. Sorry, Erin, were you done?
Yeah, I mean, that was it. My point is basically that, we're unlocking land and we're unlocking additional uses, and that there are reasonably, foreseeable direct or indirect benefits to these properties, and that knowing which properties now, it's much more evident from this attachment that was only developed in the last week, that I think it's worthwhile to take a closer look on that issue. So that's it.
Thank you. I will say for some of the buildings, so the zoning ordinance, right, has really specific definition for a shopping center, which is it's got to be on one shared parcel of at least an acre, and it's got to have at least 8 ground level storefronts. So it's kind of really specific information, criteria. For that example, council member that you raised with the the Doodle Hopper shopping center, or maybe the Mr. Brown's one, I think these shape files it shows the whole building, but some of these are actually individual parcels that are chopped up. And so when looking at the strict requirement or definition of a shopping center, then those would apply, because maybe there's just enough individual parcels that it's 7 storefronts altogether, or the parcel is just under an acre or something like that. So
my only point of it is similar to Mary Beth's, that I think it's worth taking a closer look, because it's not clear how this would apply, and that as tenants turn over, if it just means that the parking is getting picked off in that lot, even though we know that they're some of the most congested lots, or that you're getting kind of further balkanization of parking because parking becomes available, and then, I don't know, they sell it to someone else or use it for someone else. That's again a restricted use, as opposed to somehow kind of facilitating what we're trying to accomplish in terms of there being more public parking and less private parking in the downtown area, for people to actually be able to park and go to multiple businesses at once.
okay.
Other questions or comments for Jack? Paul, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Paul Stoddard, Planning Director with the city. Sorry I couldn't be there in person tonight. One thing one thing behind sort of staff's motivation about sort of why this was proposed the way it was, one of the things we wanted to do was certainly be very transparent in the process and also be on a business-friendly footing. We were worried, taking signals from past proposals, especially around outdoor dining. I think originally staff had suggested setting up a special use permit for outdoor dining. Council said, thank you. What does that look like? And we came back with a 6-month, what we thought was streamlined special use permit. And that really wasn't satisfactory. And so ultimately that moved to a by right stance. I think in a similar way, what we'd be looking at is a situation where there's an existing building, an existing parking lot, right? No one's proposing any construction, right? You have the parking you have. And then a prospective tenant is coming in and they want to know whether they can set up shop, right? They want to know whether they can sign that lease. And so really we wanted a system that was designed around sort of that decision point. So, right, someone's not going to sign a lease, if being able to open up shop is contingent on a future, BZA hearing or maybe even a staff determination, right? They need to have sort of certainty in hand when they're making those business decisions. So that was part of the calculus and how we set it up. To the concerns about the map, one thing that probably doesn't show very well on this map is that it doesn't actually show all the surface parking around all these buildings. So generally, these buildings that are highlighted in orange, from past small area plans, we know that the floor area ratio, right, to how much building is there to how much land is on the lot, ranges from about 0.1 to a high of 0.25. So generally, a building takes up somewhere between a tenth to a quarter of the lot, and usually a little more than half of the lot is set up as surface parking, with the rest being sort of drive aisles and trash and dumpsters. So there is, it doesn't come through very clearly on this map the way we've depicted it, but a lot of the area in between all those buildings you can imagine as being surface parking. And then some of the largest buildings that are shown here are actually parking garages themselves. For example, the Kaiser Garage shows up as a large orange building. The George Mason Square building is actually much smaller than the parking garage that supports it behind, or the bowling alley, which of course has its own large surface parking lot supporting it. So just to add that into the conversation about wanting to make sure that there's business certainty for businesses as they open up, and two, sort of how do we use the parking that's already there? Because generally what we see, right, is that landlords want to maintain their property as is, and they're happy to make changes to the interior of the building or the facade of the building to facilitate a tenant, but generally they don't change the site or the grounds. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Caroline?
Just a couple of questions. Just reconfirming that there is no negative impact to handicap spaces, correct?
Correct, yeah, the ADA spaces are based on the existing on-site parking. So again, we're not proposing taking existing parking spaces away. So what's on-site would remain fixed.
Wanted to notate that out for all. And then as you get feedback, I just want to make sure we, you mentioned reference to small business area, is it S-Band? Was in process. Did you get any feedback from them? It was page 4 at the bottom.
Right. We haven't heard back from them. They're still looking it over. But yeah, we did reach out to the Small Business Anti-Displacement Network, who my colleague Emily Bazemore worked extensively with for the East End Small Area Plan update. So we have an existing relationship with them. They are, again, taking a look at the proposal through an equity lens. This was something that was brought up during the Planning Commission discussion. And so we have not heard back from them yet, but expecting
we're still going to chase that. Okay. And then the Chamber of Commerce, did they write a letter? I'm hearing from line 40 to 43 that in general they're supporting that. Is there any more depth to the conversation other than those sentences that you want to share?
They are. So we were expecting their written recommendation. I think that's still forthcoming and will be included in future packages. But
of concern, you're not expecting any surprises on that letter?
No, they similar to the EDA. I think they were asking about like how high, how much further it could go, and so there was some discussion about the limits of the number versus what was referred out. There was also some discussion about, again, unintended consequences that has been raised at most meetings about concerns of overflow, which again I would point to the existing public parking supply. Yep. But those were the kind of themes of that discussion.
Thank you.
Justine?
Thank you for this. I did want to clarify a discussion from earlier that I wasn't quite following. So for some of these buildings, like the Broad and Washington building, but on the southwest corner, the George Mason building, if that building has sort of a shared parking agreement with all the tenants that are in the building, so there's not like, I mean, I guess there might be some reserved spots for a restaurant for certain times, but how would this proposal work within that framework if there are shared parking in that space?
If it's an approved parking management plan that the city has,
Yeah.
then that would be a disqualifier. If it's, are you talking about like a private agreement that's within
Yeah,
the owned building?
right.
That's something we could look at. Right now, as written, we're talking mostly about as a way to talk about existing buildings versus new construction, which is where the site plan and those kind of things get approved. So as written, it's kind of limited to, you know, an agreement with that the city has a record of transportation demand management plan or parking management plan.
Okay.
And just to follow up on that, I think also the concept is this would be an agreement for one property owner with another property owner. It's not about parking agreements amongst tenants with the same landlord, if you're following.
Oh,
And the reason that that's a differentiator is because where there's a parking agreement with one property owner with another, that's because they had a parking problem, and the city mandated that they have an agreement with another property owner off-site. That's the situation that we're specifically referring to with the Flower Building as an example.
okay.
And that's why that building would not be eligible.
Right, that makes sense. But I guess I would be curious to know what are the parking requirements for the, I guess, Karma Yoga and the Thai shop and the Japanese shop? Like, I guess this is what I'm wondering, if let's say a civic use wanted to move into where the Thai restaurant is right now, that would require more parking by our parking standards. But would that suddenly somehow change that shared parking that they have there? Like, would a civic building or civic use not be able to move in, or a salon actually not be able to move into one of those stalls there because it would suddenly require more parking for that area?
Right. I think it would be, I'm not exactly, so in the CEO, right, they would have to say how much, they have to prove how much like parking they would have, right? And I assume that would be not, you know, during zoning review. I'm not exactly sure how, you know, what their process is, but they would have to prove that they have that parking available. So in that parking agreement, but you're saying a use with that takes up a larger chunk of that parking agreement or existing parking.
Yeah. I'm just trying to figure out how this proposal would affect
The other businesses.
That complex, or how this proposal would affect the George Mason Square complex. So yeah, that would be a little bit helpful for me to understand.
I'll just say, like, generally that's where the shopping center descriptor comes in, or the disqualifier, because shopping centers do have the shared parking bays. So more often than not, there are, I mean, like the example you pointed out, but most of our shopping centers do have, you know, the shared parking for all their tenants. And so that would be a disqualifier.
Gotcha. Okay.
So are we saying that 200 block wouldn't be eligible then because they're considered a shopping center?
If they are like per the zoning ordinance determined to be a shopping center, again, through that specific criteria, then yes, they would be disqualified. Then they couldn't take advantage of this.
So I would just be curious to know about that information. Other things. So actually, and I think maybe Paul answered this question. How do businesses convert space right now? So let's say they're 706 Washington Street. They would probably, like, let's say a restaurant wants to move in. Or is it maybe the broker advertising the business would say restaurant space available or something available? Or is it usually a business that comes to the landlord and says, hey, I want to move in, and the landlord maybe comes to the city and says, hey, can I have this? like at what point does that decision get made, and such that if we had to have even if it's an easy application process, are we suddenly now missing out on businesses?
How are the uses advertised, like the commercial use capacity?
I guess how would a change in use happen? Is what
Right, and that's probably up to the individual landlords about how much. So say like a restaurateur comes to the owner of a space that wasn't previously a restaurant, and they say, I'm interested in this space. Right, I mean, that would be up to the individual landlord to probably look at how much that would cost, and it would be more of a site-by-site determination. We talked to, a couple of folks in the Chamber of Commerce who kind of brought up this, a scenario where you have a building with several tenants and one space maybe wants to convert into a restaurant. There are other kind of considerations that might caution against that, like odors and other, the costs of converting it. So it really does become an individual landlord decision.
Okay. But I guess my sense is that having some sort of application process through the city to reduce it would actually, in some ways, does limit the conversion of that space into something else.
I see.
And that's at least what it sounded like Paul said. I would be, well, is it possible under Virginia law or whatever else to have some sort of incentive program for businesses to convert that parking space into something that's more activated? Whether it be put a tree or, put outdoor dining, or actually making that placemaking in spaces that we're no longer using.
We can look into that. I know the only other example I know of where there's a parking reduction like incentive is with the outdoor dining as a model. I know that was included in what got adopted. That's the only other example I know of where there's actual like language about parking reduction other than like using it for bike parking or something. So that's something we can look at.
Okay. And just finally, I know we've been talking a lot about unintended consequences of this proposal, but I also want to stress that there are a ton of unintended consequences from the original 1960s parking proposal mandates. It makes it harder to adapt old buildings to new uses. It promotes tear downs of older buildings. If we want to make it easier for small businesses to set up shop, we do want them to adapt older buildings with smaller footprints. Going through this proposal, some of these, like this 1,000 square foot, if for retail space, 1,600 square foot, 1950s building, if you wanted to use it for a salon, you need 49 parking spaces. That's absurd. If you wanted to have a civic space, we talk about the importance of civics and people and club meetings and other things like that, you need 27 parking spaces. But if you want to have a butcher shop or a bakery or a deli, you need 7 parking spaces. So this confirms to me, as these numbers are now, that they're outdated and arbitrary, and it actually pains me to look through these numbers as they are. So I would be strongly in favor of actually going to the drawing board and revising all of these requirements, but specifically for this proposal, I think we want a city that has places like Northside Social, that has places like La Tangeria, and where these businesses can exist and thrive. And so there are potential pain points. I bike to those places now, but we do want to reduce the barriers for small businesses. And as we have with those businesses, we've been able to figure out ways to make it work. And I think our city is better for it. So with that, we have to weigh the cost versus benefit. And I think leaving things as is, there's far more cost. And so I support the 1,200 square foot reduction as is. And I would also like to see a more comprehensive review of our parking codes at some point. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Debbie?
I don't think I'll really add, but we had quite a discussion already, but I do echo the sentiments that you just expressed, Justine, with regard to the end goal and desire I think that we all have is to make this an easier process for people to do those creative things that have made Falls Church City unique and interesting and are a huge draw around the region. So we'll look to staff to think through a lot of the other questions that were raised tonight and and hear back from you after your further consideration and look to your expertise to address those concerns. But I too am in support of that, you know, with the additional consideration of the topics that were brought up tonight, which have merit as well. But we'll be discussing this at the ESC, I guess, on Thursday, and I can pretty much assure you what will come back from that is that we're still overparked, and like, so I don't think there'll be a surprise there. What the feeling is, like PSC wants to reduce cars in all ways, shapes, or form and increase businesses that people can walk to and bike to, and micromobility that we've discussed before. We'll continue working on those issues too. So thank you. That's all.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for this work, Jack. I think I'm with Justine and Debbie in that I support the sentiment of doing this first kind of incremental change. The two comments I would offer is to address Mary Beth's concern about kind of the large buildings, and I'm kind of thinking out loud, is to avoid the scenario where every unit within that large building could be applying for parking reduction and end up with no parking. Is there a way where we could cap it or look at what the reduction may be as we might get a few of those COs come in? I don't know whether we want that because it obviously benefits people who move first, but let's just think through that scenario. I do think that's a pretty low likelihood compared to the standalone buildings that I think is what we're really trying to encourage, the adaptive reuse and new small businesses moving in. But let's give that some thought to make sure that's not a concern. Besides Paul's point, which I thought was really good, which is not showing the asphalt parking lot, is a general thing that I think we need to start getting comfortable with is there's also lots of street parking. And street parking at the end of the day are public spaces. I know everyone feels like the spaces in front of their home or in front of a business belongs to them, but at the end of the day, I think it's getting comfortable with the idea that those are public spaces. And I think generally, if you are adjacent to a commercial area, those need to be turned over every 2 hours. You know, I think it's city policy for commercial use. And I think where it starts bleeding into residential areas is where we have the residential parking program. But in a general sentiment that I think as a community we need to get more comfortable with is realizing that street spaces are public spaces and they are for public use. So whether it's asphalt parking lots or street spaces, I think we just need to encourage people to use existing spaces more. And I think a reduction program like this helps encourage that to happen. So in general, I support the sentiment, but given the comments that you heard, hopefully staff can take a look at the recommendations from council and get back to us. So thank you for the work.
Thank you.
Just one more question, Jack, and that is, when you originally proposed this to us, we voted for 1,000 square foot limit. Did anybody speak in favor of that? And it came out 1,200 from the chamber and from the EDA. Were there any other comments regarding that? And if we change it, do we have to do another first reading? Because we've changed that materially.
So that's a city attorney question. I know that conversation has been had. Sally, do you want to weigh in on that? A new first reading?
Thank you. Thank you. You're saying that the initial was 1,000 and we've moved it up to 1,200, the reduction. Is that correct?
Yes.
I did not think that was material because the idea that's being presented is the idea of reducing parking, and I think that jump from 1,000 to 1,200 was not enough to cause the entire idea to have to start over. It is the same idea. It's just a question of degree, and I think that's acceptable as a change.
Okay, thanks. And what, did anybody speak in favor of 1,000 and not 1,200?
Well, as the as a body, both groups, the general sentiment was, you know, again, how high can we go? And so and that question came out, how high can we go without triggering a new first reading? And so the EDA recommended 1,200 square feet, and I think the chamber kind of looked to that recommendation and. Again, with the same sentiment about expressing interest in increasing the number or going as high as it could, voted to second the EDA's recommendation.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Actually, want to also plus one Justine's suggestion for parking incentives through using spaces as placemaking. I think we saw from COVID that outdoor dining was a great use of making an asphalt parking space more productive. So if we can encourage that kind of use in return for a reduction, I think that would make sense too.
As we wrap up this item just for work session discussion, I will say this. I think from staff's perspective, this was kind of an easy code amendment. There's been a lot of comment tonight that would make it more complicated. But from this discussion, our intention would be to come on August 12th for second reading without another work session and have it pretty much in the form that you see it today. So one of the things we wanted to get consensus on is the council expecting to see this at 1,000 feet or at 1,200 feet? So we don't want to surprise anybody on that on the 12th. The other comments, I think we should address them because some of them were in this kind of idea of having some sort of higher level of review of this. This proposal is to streamline it and is to have this be a pretty simple process, as Mr. Stoddard said, so that when someone comes in with a change of use that you need a certificate of occupancy for and they're about to sign a lease, there's not a question about the parking. And so we want to just check that there's consensus that this process is the right process. Staff believes it is. I think it's worth addressing this question about could this have larger unintended consequences or have a larger building all of a sudden that has no parking requirements. We don't think that's the way that this goes. A building has parking today. The issue is with a new use that comes in that might have a more lively use. It might be more intense on the parking. What we'd be saying is for this tenant, if it's under 1,000 square feet, we're not going to say no to the certificate of occupancy based on parking. But things are going to change. This is one tenant at one moment. These tenants change all the time. The property owner is going to operate like a shopping center does. They're going to look out for their interests and the balance of tenants that they have so that their customers and their tenants are having a successful experience in their property. We believe that with this small increment, this is going to self-regulate. We think it's very unlikely that there will be compounding negative effects. That's staff's assessment of this. But we've gotten comment tonight, but I do want to just in terms of the next steps, confirm that, largely what, we're going to assess the comments and see if there are any other changes that we should work on, but otherwise we'd bring this back on the 12th largely as is, and that one question of 1,000 or 1,200 is one that we would like consensus on.
I would be in favor of 1,200.
Plus one.
Yeah.
That's the only factor. I think the other underpinnings are.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's not 1,000 versus 1,200. It's that there are potentially significant concerns. It was a fulsome discussion in other boards and commissions that I think is being, not like, I don't want to say downplayed, because I think Jack is being forthright with what he presented, but there were significant concerns in those bodies, even recognizing that we need to move in a better direction from balkanized parking and an overabundance of off-street parking and what may be not as much on-street parking as we would like. And so my concern is that I think this actually demands, a more comprehensive look than sort of a quick fix. And I'm concerned that we don't even have the Planning Commission recommendation, and that the conversation that did take place, which, like I said, was a spirited conversation that went so far as to discuss new uses versus should existing tenants in buildings have some safety valve mechanism available to them. If you're a pre-existing tenant and you plan to be in the city for an extended period of time, does that create its own sort of issues with respect to COs for new tenants coming in versus those businesses that already exist, and why is they have to have much higher sort of draconian parking requirements relative to their neighbor who comes into the same shopping center. So I would like to benefit from that recommendation, and if others want to move ahead to second reading, then
So
that's fine.
There,
And I think
there
that
is
there's also this
there is
issue.
the kind of the factual issue about the Planning Commission. They have not yet rendered a recommendation, and they're going to do so in August. And so that is an issue. The date of the Planning Commission recommendation is the 7th.
That's right.
So that's before we finalize the agenda for our meeting, so we could get an update.
Maybe we could do a check-in with the planning commission.
Take a closer look at whether anyone should be amending any motions they made.
We'll follow up offline on that.
Any other? Mary Beth?
My request is to do another scrub of that map and really see exactly, there are some shopping centers that are on there that could come off, and do another review just to make sure that we know exactly what's included. Thanks. And look into that flower building issue. Because I really don't know that it's a city issue. I think it was more of a decision to do it, but there's no mandate that it had to happen.
I think that is papered, and
Do you?
so I'll
Okay.
that's my
Okay.
memory, and so,
Yeah.
and it's getting back 15 years, but I
Yeah,
believe
exactly.
so.
Okay.
And just from my point of view, I feel mostly comfortable with this proposal. I would just like to see some of those questions answered. But otherwise, I feel like this will be a step in the right direction.
I guess my view is I support the overall direction, but looking at the fact that there are dozens of buildings that may be impacted, I'm not sure that we've really grasped the potential downside. The other thing that would be really useful for the public would be to give them a map that shows actual street names so that they can have a better idea. There are a few street names here listed, but a lot aren't. So it'd be really helpful for the public to understand that. And again, I support the overall direction, but I want to make sure there aren't outliers and we're not acting in a way that would act contrary to what we're trying to achieve, but B, other objectives as well. Thanks.
Is that helpful enough? Okay, thank you.
Council.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks,
Thank you.
Paul. Okay, up next, we have the rent relief update. Welcome, Ripple.
Mr. Patel will give the staff report on this. The request is to review this in preparation for first reading on July 22nd. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Patel for the staff briefing.
City Manager, good evening, Madam Mayor. This one. Good evening, Madam Mayor, respected council members, and member of the public. My name is Ripple Patel. I work for Department of Human Services, and as part of my job, I manage a couple of grants. One of them is rent relief, and that is why I'm here today. We are requesting to amend the city code for rent relief program. This program was established in 2002, a long time ago. And during our assessment, we found that some of the items in this code is out of compliance. So we are trying to bring that back in compliance with this change. And we are also trying to change the way we calculate the relief amount for our clients. Now, a little bit of history for the program. This program was originally established, as I said, in 2002. The program provides rent relief for low-income persons who are either elderly or are permanently and totally disabled, to help them remain in the city. That's the whole idea. The program provides eligible residents a single annual grant, one-time payment. Amount is based on rent paid in the prior calendar year. Now, Department of Human Services, we also provide financial assistance to city residents who are struggling financially to pay their rent. Now, rent relief is completely different than financial assistance program that we provide. These are two completely different programs. Their requirements are different. The way we pay and what we pay is also completely different for both programs. The proposed ordinance impacts only rent relief program. Now, who are eligible candidates for the program? The applicant must be a city resident at the time of the application filed. The applicant must have been a resident of the city for at least some portion of the calendar year immediately prior to calendar year in which the application was filed. the applicant's gross combined household income falls below a number equal to 50% of the area median household income defined by HUD. And the applicant is at least 65 years of age or is permanently and totally disabled. Now, current calculation versus what we are trying to change. Current calculation is a 3-tier system we have based on the income brackets. Ranges from $700 all the way up to $1,700. If a household income is up to $17,738, they receive $1,700, which is the maximum amount we pay through the program. If the household income ranges between $17,739 and $35,487, that's the mid-tier, they receive $1,200. And the higher tier, which is $35,488 to $53,235, they receive $700. Now, what we are trying to bring it up to is we want to move away from this 3-tier system to a percentage-based calculation. So they will receive 10% of the total rent paid during the previous calendar year, up to a cap of $2,500. So say, for example, if they're paying $19,000 as their rent, they will receive $1,900. If they have paid $15,000, the rent relief will be $1,500. If you look at the chart on the screen, this will give you an overview of last 3 years, how we have paid rent relief and how the new calculation will make a difference for our applicants. In 2023, 7 applicants applied for the program. The average rent paid was $16,050, and the average relief received was $1,271. If we go by the calculation we are proposing today, they had received $334 more than what they received. For 2024, 6 applicants, average rent paid $16,808, and average relief received was $1,283. Based on new calculation, they had received $398 more. Now, for the current fiscal year, we received 8 applications. Average rent paid was $17,176. And the average relief we have sent out so far is $1,388. With this change, we will be able to send them another check of average $330. Fiscal impact for this change, this ordinance would be the fiscal impact for this ordinance would be approximately $3,200 per year. This is based on the new calculation. It will add $300 to $400 for each client based on FY 2025 number. And if the number of clients increase over time, the fiscal impact could grow and go higher. For FY 2025, we are not requesting $60 for the entire year, which will cover the change as well. So I am requesting your approval to send this to first reading, then second reading, and then for your vote of approval. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ripple. Caroline?
Sure.
Thanks, Ripple. Maybe I'm reading this wrong, but I understand that I'm looking at line 248 to 249 and 250. I thought my understanding up above in kind of the synopsis or the beginning is that in order to qualify, you have to be 65 and permanently and totally disabled. Is that correct?
No, or.
Or, it's or.
Yes.
So, okay. So it is an or and not an and.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. And then, so all of these changes, we've worked with Sally to make sure that they are in line with Virginia code.
Yes.
Okay.
And that is one of the reasons why we are changing as well.
That's
Yes,
the
bring them up
compliance
to the
comment that you were saying,
Mhm.
right? when we did this calculation based on the rent and not, well, based on the income and not the rent, let me re-ask this. Is there anything that triggered this change other than compliance?
So if you look at the current chart, how we calculate income ranges from 17,000 all the way up to 53,000, which is 50% of her median income. Even with $53,000, our residents are struggling to pay their rent, and the relief that we are providing, $1,700, which is maximum, is still not enough for them to pay their rent and stay in the city. So most of our clients are struggling to pay even their rent. And if you look at their income, we don't have any client who falls under that high tier of $53,000 income. So how do we bring up the number even when the income is not increasing a lot for them? So this change, 10% of rent based on their rent burden, will automatically increase their amount that they're receiving. So try to give them more money where income is not changing, but we are just moving away from the tier system so they can actually take advantage of that.
So there's a need, right? So you see a need to provide more money because you see an increasing disparity, right, between what we were able to provide and what the need was. Again, I just want to make sure that in that switch from AMI to rent-based, I support it. It is just making sure that we're in line, right? Because we marched along, maybe weren't compliant for many years. I don't, not great, but good that we caught it. But if we're at this point where we're in compliance, but we're switching the methodology, I just want to make sure that it is providing the best benefit to those that need it.
Yes,
right?
sure.
So, and you're saying that this proposal does that. It meets the compliance as well as providing the benefit. Because when you take a look at the 300, it doesn't sound like much, but that could be my view. So that is the best that we can offer.
Up to $2,500, let's don't forget. And also, it's also depending on the rent they have paid. Now, the other problem that we have seen is rent has gone up from the beginning of this program and not the relief. So that's what we are trying to match up that amount as well. And by going with the percentage, the advantage we have is we don't have to come back and change this amount every year or every 2 years or 5 years. If their rent goes up, their relief will go up based on 10%.
It's scalar.
Yeah, it's scalar. So that's the advantage we have with that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Debbie?
I really like that change because it is proportionate to, and to not come back and do that. I was wondering if we had looked at any AMIs even lower than 50%, or if like 50% is regionally standard, or I was surprised at how low the numbers were of how much rent relief we're actually giving, given the number of people who said that's important to them and to their families.
So 50% is kind of average around this area with the neighborhood jurisdictions. That's why we are going by them, trying to match their program as well. And City of Fairfax has exact same match. What we are trying to change, their program is exactly the same match to us. But we have not looked into lower AMI like you asked.
I just, this is something that's going to continue to be an issue as housing is increasingly expensive, and I just want to do more to ensure that as some of us get closer to those numbers of 65, we appreciate it even more, the need that will be here. And I'd like to keep Falls Church City a city that has, the full spectrum of demographics, income, and age. So I would just vote for us continuing to look at this moving forward, not to hold up this particular change, but as we look at our budgets in years out, as we look at housing overall in our next several months of work on council, I want to keep that in mind too, that it's a nominal expense to deliver what I think most of us want to have in the city in terms of demographics. Thank you.
Can I just quickly go back to your question? So the way we thought about the whole thing and decided to stay with 50% is the applications we receive and the income range that we see is nowhere near 50% even. So yes, I agree with you if we go lower and just allow more people to apply for the program, but there are not that many people who apply for this program with that higher income. That's why we decided to just stay with 50, because even the current applicants are not even there. And there is a huge gap between where they are and 50% AMI.
Interesting, thank you.
Justine?
Looking at these requirements, so the applicant's gross combined household income has below or equal to 50%. Let's say somebody's 65 or over, they have a 401k or they have a retirement account that's, I don't know, I'll say $1 million, but their income is less than 50. Like, how do we take into account net worth or net assets?
So their asset requirement is $150,000.
Okay. And so then, I guess the other question I have is why, how did 65 get picked? I imagine that, we're talking about wanting variety of ages and people in the city. So I imagine that, there are people 60 or 55 or 20. Why specifically 65?
So this program is designed specifically for elderly and person with disabilities. So there is no other reason behind that. It's just to help them keep in the city. There are other programs that other range of people can apply for it, like our ADU program, the CCAU program. There are other programs that can support them with their income. This group of people, their income is not actually at that level to apply for any other program. That's why we want to make a specific program just to target those audience and help get them help that they need.
So this specifically helps a population that wouldn't be served by the CCAU or?
CCAU is an option for them, but then again, CCAU has an income requirement. These clients don't have that higher of an income to even pay for a subsidized housing. Let's say, for example, if we pick a CCAU where they have to pay $900 per month, that's a lot of money for some of these clients to come out and pay for it. Versus rent relief, yes, it's only, let's say, for example, $1,700 for them a year, but when they put that across the year, that will subsidize their rent in a way for them. So I think it depends. We have to go case by case to see if they qualify for other programs, and that's also a plan to see if we can bring any of these clients over to the CCAU program where they get year-round help rather than just one check per year. But then again, every client will not qualify for that with the level of income they have.
Thank you.
No worries.
Aaron?
Two questions. And the first one, I'm asking the first one because it flows into my second question. Just so that I understand what this actually is, and I'm fully supportive of the program. As far as I understood this, it's a grant program, and a person comes in and they say, I meet the eligibility criteria, this is what my rental income is, and based on that, we give them, if they qualify, the grant. And the grant actually isn't like use restricted to pay for their rent from month 1 to month 12 versus, month 1 to negative month 12, right? So we say, you paid a lot for rent, it was disproportionate to your income and your ability, you get this $1,500 grant, maybe you put it in the bank in order to offset costs that were like food costs you didn't pay for because you had rent that was too high, or the person budgets it over the next 12 months in order to create their own mini subsidy for the rent that they're creating. Okay.
Right. Yeah, and it's more to understand for us to pay them based on something.
Yeah.
That rent has to be paid before, so that we can okay, you have that much rent burden that you went through last year. We know that, and we can see that. So now we wanna put this money aside for you, so you can, like you said, do your own subsidy for your rent.
Determine where best to put that relief, given what we viewed as a highly cost burden previous year that likely would be their circumstance for the next year. Okay, so that leads to my question, just in the staff report, line 352 to 369 has this new language about appeals, and basically, if you're an applicant aggrieved by a decision of a local board in granting, denying, changing, or discontinuing public assistance. And I guess I'm trying to understand the appeals process and how that interacts with something like a grant, right? That's different than public assistance in terms of, you know, recurring payments or something like, you know, food stamps or Medicaid or disability benefits. Normally someone, you know, has something similar to a property interest in those sorts of payments. And so there's like a reason why you would have administrative or like due process before you would be able to deny those benefits. And so I guess I would just ask I saw Sally came off mic, the city attorney, to think about, like, you know, obviously people have available to them like non-discrimination provisions that if the city were doing this in a discriminatory manner, you would have options available to you under like Title VI or Title IX or whatever to come in and say, Title VI, let's say, you're doing this in a race-based manner that's inappropriate and I should get, you know, my benefit or grant because of that. But in terms of like this particular appeals provision and like who is the commissioner and are we appropriately organized for like duly qualified hearing officers? This seemed, I just was interested in this given the type of program that this is.
So the commissioners are the Human Services Advisory Council commissioners who sits on that committee. They review the grant and they provide their approval and recommendation for that each year for all the applicants. So they will review the appeal process as well. And Ms. Gillette, if you can correct me if I'm wrong there, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Patel. I wanted to say the appeal requirement is a statutory requirement, or the appeal provision is a statutory requirement. And I have not looked at this in a while, and I'll take another look at it again, and I can certainly, you know, provide some more detail at the next meeting for council. Because I no longer, Mr. Patel may be correct, but I don't recall the identity of the commissioner in this case. I almost thought I remembered it being some kind of a, you know, at the state housing, but that could be incorrect. Yeah, but my thought process is that that the appeal is really limited to someone saying I was qualified and denied, and that the review would be just to ensure that the person was in fact not qualified, and that there was no error.
Yeah, so that's all. So I think it just warrants looking at 352 to 369 and how it interacts with the grant program and the stages of any appeal process, what it is or isn't limited to, and who the ultimate like governing body is for that administrative review. Thank you.
Yeah.
Other comments? Okay, so I also support the sentiment of updating the program. I had a similar question as Debbie, which was how do we expand eligibility? So whether it's reducing the 50% AMI threshold, whether it's the age requirements. I know sometimes we define seniors as 65, sometimes we define it as 62, if that's another opportunity. And then how do other jurisdictions do it, which you mentioned City of Fairfax is a very similar program, just to kind of figure out cost of living. Their median home value is about $200,000 less than Falls Church's. And so I think that if that's a good proxy, that, you know, our cost of living might be comparatively a little higher, and so might warrant a more generous program and higher grant levels. So just something for us to think about, because I was pretty surprised that we only had 8 residents taking advantage of the program.
That is also after doing significant outreach.
Yes, and that was kind of my follow-up question, which is how do people know about this, right? Like, is it the clients that we already serve regularly and it's the same 6 to 8 people that come in every year? How do we expand the outreach? Because the people, I know we often post things online or do social media, but I feel like the ones who most benefit or could use the programs probably aren't the ones that are online. And so I think I would encourage staff to be creative and figure out how to do that outreach to really help serve the people who need it most.
Sure, so just to speak on that, yes, we do all that online and news press. We do that every year, but we also go out in the community to talk to them about the program as well. So this year we went to Winter Hill and we did an outreach over there. We explained the program, not just rent relief. We also talked about housing programs as well. And we got some applications from Winter Hill But we also have to keep in mind some of these clients, they have housing choice voucher or they are already living in CCAU, so they're not qualified for the program. But we do try to go out in the community and talk to them about the different programs.
Yeah, occasionally I stop by the community center during the senior center program, and so that might be another option to think about. There, you already have a captive audience there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And can
true.
target a lot of the outreach there. So, but in general, I think we all support the sentiment of this program and definitely recommend updating it to be in compliance as well.
Thank you.
So, any final comments for Ripple?
No.
Okay. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
How about a quick break in between items, if that's okay for folks? Okay, it's 8:55. How about we resume at 9 o'clock? Thanks.
I didn't get an update, so I don't think it's broadcasting correctly. It was a technical issue. It isn't. Second, I just wanted to note, even though the cable wasn't broadcasting, YouTube and the online website does have the meeting live. Thank you.
Right, so we're back with council to discuss the key initiatives that are aligned with the council's priorities. And so what's before the council is very much the similar content to what you reviewed before, with gray highlighted text to reflect council comments the last time. And just sort of as a note, this list is meant to be the things that we as an organization would take. This is the city council's priorities of things that you want to use your leverage to improve in the city or make changes in the city. Nested in this, we also have other, the department directors are working together on some of our organizational change levers as well. Those need to be aligned with this and nested within the governing body's key priorities. And then one layer deeper than that, at the department level, they also have their initiatives, some of which are very important for customer service and for service delivery, but those are more at the departmental level, and those also need to be aligned. So what we're really trying to work through in this conversation is alignment up and down the organization, greater clarity of what we're working on and where we're trying to grow as a city, or where we're trying to go as a city. One other note on this, our intention with this list, then we'll have the discussion tonight, hopefully reach consensus on it, and then we will be back before you on all this work, either to just give you a briefing and an update on a regular quarterly basis, or on some of these instances where the scope is not yet fully fleshed out, like the solid waste initiative. We'll be back to you soon in the fall for a scope of work discussion. We're proceeding with this. We know this is an important initiative. Let's have more discussion about exactly how expansive this is going to be or how narrow this is going to be. The streetscape update as another one, the council's already signaled, let's keep that scope of work very narrow. So we now have that direction. We do want to have one more conversation with you about that tonight as an example, but that's how we would intend to proceed on these. I'd like to turn it over to Andy Young to kind of hit the highlights of the gray highlighted text. So that's what we will focus on tonight. But if the council has other things that aren't highlighted here that the council wants to talk about, we will engage in that as well.
Great.
Mr. Young.
Thank you, Wyatt. So I think we started last time we met with you all with 24 priority initiatives with a goal of staying under 25. So I think the math from where we were last time is I think we've added 3 and taken away 1. So we've kind of broken the 25 rule a little bit, but we're close. So we'll hit on those big changes, and then we've tried to capture some of the comments and feedback that you all had provided to us the last time that we got together 2 weeks ago. So if it's all right with you all, we'll kind of walk through it real quick. So starting on line 51, Sophie. So for the environmental sustainability kind of bucket overall, there were several items I think that came up during the discussion that we've captured here as kind of interest to members of council, but we didn't kind of add those as specific new initiatives. So a policy for mowing and landscaping contracts not to rely on gas power, city government policy to avoid using single-use plastics, and then adopting more stringent stormwater retention and detention policies. So those will be topics that we can kind of continue to talk with you all in the future about what that scope might look like. As it pertains to the energy plans, of note, we added the...
Interrupt. Are you looking for consensus tonight or just in general, like so that we know whether you want to add them to the work plan or not? Like, I want to pause there so that we don't leave it out there hanging, right?
Okay, so I would say we're not proposing to add these to the work plan at this stage. If you all feel very strongly about that, otherwise, to that signal would be helpful, right? Some of these sound, well, the last one we all, I think, can agree isn't simple. The others sound simple, but will require some staff time and some work to figure out how to implement. So I think we're proposing not to include them at this point. but if you all have feedback otherwise, yeah, we can talk about that now.
Who's got input?
I guess I'm generally like, is it like something that would be a fairly small lift and like, simply, as a contract comes up, we change or who we're working with, or like, it's almost like, could these things just be done like in the background and not necessarily made a priority? Because I would be in favor of these things strongly, but
I think that's what we're proposing, is that they are done in the background. And so we don't have the answer right now in terms of what the implications would be to put out our mowing bid with a electric-only equipment. But we, if it's not on this, if it is on the plan, if council says, no, we want this listed on the plan, okay, then it's elevated and we will make, we will have a lot of communication on this. If it's not on the plan, it is registered, but it's, but we're gonna kind of work it through the normal course of business and get council more information on it before a decision is made.
Because I was looking for like the hybrid. Like, I personally think it's important because I don't think it is a super high level of effort. Like, as contracts come up, we should absolutely look at using an electric only service and then understanding the cost implications and be ready to commit to extra costs if that means it's a greener option for us, right? I guess how else would we know that we're going to do that unless it's on a plan? Like, would it come up through a contract authorization like we have on the consent agenda tonight? How else would we know these things are getting done in the background? In general, I think the sentiment of leading by example is important for us to have visibility on. But open to...
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking like, maybe this is something, maybe it's not on a strategic priority plan, but it's a task on Kurt or staff's, goals and objectives, like, which we don't have visibility. It's important enough to have discussed it multiple times. These have come up time and time again, year after year. But if it's not to the level of a strategic priority, I mean, to your point, how do we make sure it's
done?
Yeah.
Like, I don't need to be on a priority because obviously it doesn't rise to those levels, but I think enough of us said that we want to do it. So I don't know where those hybrid things fit, right?
So if there is, consensus on these, then I think where they would fit is additional bullet points. And I think for the landscaping contracts, what would feel like a way to communicate that would be to explore that as an option and report back, within some reasonable period of time. And I'm not even sure what our rhythm is on putting that work out to bid.
Those contracts that typically award and then they have renewal options. This would constitute us pulling it out of cycle and doing a new procurement.
I think we would just do it as part of the normal procurement process, right? When things
But
come up.
that might be several years from now, right? So I think that's.
I think
I'd support. That's
I'm
what
fine
I would
with that,
support.
think.
To do it as part, not change it now.
coming up for bid, then it's a consideration. And I think it's probably going to take a couple of those before we get to contractors who they themselves have enough electric equipment that they can guarantee they're going to be able to use it on, right?
Yeah.
It's probably going to take a couple of iterations of contracts.
I think on the last time we, recently redid our contract, this was explored. And, we're basically told that, vendors aren't providing that service to, contracts as big as ours at this stage. So,
They will, so keep at,
yep.
keep asking.
That's what I was gonna say too, like, the more you inquire, like, even, there's a benefit to inquire, to have the market pressure and to say, we're a jurisdiction among other jurisdictions who keep inquiring about this, and so maybe you will shift to, these options if we
Agreed.
keep saying it, even if it's not in our current contract, or the current contract isn't coming up for however long.
I think, I would say the third bullet, if that's something, council wants to take on, that's not a small thing. That one might be a full-blown initiative if that's something that we wanted to dig into in the next 18 months or, 2-year work plan kind of thing.
Is the first step there kind of understanding kind of the region, like how much authority do we have, and then what does the region do, and how we compare compared to the region, I guess.
Right.
Just a benchmark, and then we can decide what's the effort, I guess, to go there? Or that in itself is a lot of effort, to understand the authority and then the.
Maybe we'll come back to you next week to talk about the code changes we had with you 2 weeks ago. There's a huge effort just to work through this kind of administrative stuff for the staff, our staff, right? And so, I'm sensitive, particularly sensitive to our, team right now with the number of initiatives we've already committed to you all to do. And I see that one, and I'm not sure when we would have the capacity to take that on right now, to be frank, right? I just want to set a realistic expectation on that one.
No,
The
that's
other
an
two,
important conversation. You need to be able to
Yeah.
say no to us. That's what we said we wanted to listen to. So I'm hearing for the third one, you can't do it unless we give you more stormwater resources. Is that?
and I don't even think it's quite that simple, right? Like you could say, Andy, you've got more stormwater resources tomorrow, and then it's going to take us 6 months to hire somebody, and I'm cautious about that one, right? I think the other two, as we were kind of talking, there's a path forward, and we can work to either incorporate them into the energy plan bullets here, or track them in some way to kind of ensure follow through to what you all are expecting.
Do the schools ride under the same maintenance because we have our own?
They do not.
The schools have their own maintenance and their staff, and we maybe as a council ask the school board to be doing this as well on both water bottles and maybe back to the coordination on the government energy operations plan.
Maybe if you pool your resources, you command a little bit more purchasing power, and you get folks that are actually responsive to the mowing and landscape contracts that don't know my desk are lawn mowing and stuff like that. If you were to do it,
Sure. Yeah, that's something Kristen and I've talked a little bit about already.
We have put in the water bottle fillers everywhere, and everybody's received water bottles, at least in on the schools, and we've done the 75th, and so we've given people resources to use as staff at least.
Can I ask one point on the more stringent stormwater retention and detention policies? For me, as we go through whatever it's called, the public utilities and government chapter of the comprehensive plan update, like the attention that we need to give to this, apart from a staff resource issue, should also be driven by like what infrastructure needs we actually have. And when we think, systems are potentially going to be overwhelmed, right? Or when they're going to be kind of at capacity, like the sewer issues that arose. And so where we can anticipate that, or the, continued building, right, creates these issues beyond the retention basins or detention policies that we currently have, then we should be as proactive as we can be in revisiting the code to make sure that in real time we are changing things as necessary so that we're not creating issues for ourselves simply because we're not putting the resources in now, right? And are dealt the issue 10 years from now because we didn't do what we could at the time in order to make sure that like building requirements were getting better as to, retention or detention on site, or that we were moving from, certain types of buildings that would need retention, detention on site to, other sorts of land use that we'd be required to do so. So I guess, for me, it's kind of like the need should also be, and the anticipated need should be driving where this fits in terms of like the resources that we need to put to it in any work plan or strategic priorities.
So I would just respond to that by saying in the stormwater realm, in particular, state policy is aligned with everything you just said. With every redevelopment, there's more detention than there was before. There are better practices. And since the city is built out, we typically benefit from that. The stormwater retention as a regulatory tool, particularly with, at the commercial level, it's one thing, where kind of the effort is is on our single-family home owners in our townhouses. And that's the lift on the policy side.
That's what I mean, like, every time I bring this up, I don't mean the commercial side, because I do feel like.
Oh, yeah, and I'm not saying, I'm not focusing on that, I'm saying overall development and overall, like, footprint, regardless of whatever the policy is, like, we should be proactive about making sure we're not worsening issues, even as we do all of these infrastructure improvements to get on top of issues that we have, or myriad issues that we have, or anticipate things, like, we should always be doing more when we can.
So when we first brought this up was when we decided to invest in the Big Six, 3 years ago now, right? And a bunch of us argued that we need to have green infrastructure, not just gray infrastructure. We have 6 projects underway. I guess it got tactical. So if we can't take on this now, is it when we get 3 out of the 6 projects done? Like when, because I think we all generally agree we want to do this. We hear you that we don't have enough resources to get to it relative to all the other priorities we want to commit to. So I guess the question I would have is, when can we get to this? And we don't have to answer now, but I guess I want to leave it in a parking lot where I don't want to lose it, because I do think that the green infrastructure need and having more stringent policies up front can only help us, knowing that storms are increasing in intensity and we're only going to have more issues with this, even if we build bigger pipes as we're doing that. So I don't want to lose sight of it. I guess the question is when and how, if not in the next 18 months.
We'll take that back.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
For the first
It was good. And then maybe we'll just kind of continue that way back and forth as we go through.
To be able to say no to us and for us to have the conversation, if not now, when, what else do you need to, if we do think that is an important priority. So it's important muscle for us to build.
Yeah. So, so moving on the 2 energy plans, I think I referenced the annual updates that were provided to the ESC in June. We've included links for both of those in the staff reports here. The one change we made, we had some discussion on kind of a reporting template to ensure we're following kind of the energy plan with our future purchases. And so, so we've added that to the government operations energy plan bullets. What Wyatt and I've talked about is kind of incorporating some standard language or approach in the contract authorizations and things that come to council. So we reference it in the contract authorizations that are coming now, but we'll work on some structure for that going forward. So if there are any questions on that, we'll move on to number 3. So line 111, identify and prioritize open space acquisitions. So the discussion that we had 2 weeks ago on this one was, or 3 weeks ago, I guess, was that, hey, should we include other property acquisition needs into the initiative? And I think our recommendation at this point is to keep this specific initiative focused on the parklet and the open space acquisition. Other needs that the city will be, or at least our perspective is that those other space needs that are going to come up are going to be driven by those requirements, and that would be the trigger that would bring it into the conversation and to you all as part of a CIP project or a request for future office space for the city staff, another police station, whatever the requirement would be. Some of that might come out as part of the utilities chapter that Councilmember Flynn was referencing earlier. But so that's our kind of take and proposal on this one. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Number 4, so down to line 143. So recommend potential code amendments to increase canopy coverage standards in the city. So I think, during the conversation 3 weeks ago, there were several other kind of potential items kind of brought up to add in city tree inventory, urban forestry management plan, additional resources. I think with what we've got on our plate and have the capacity to do right now, we're recommending kind of stick with the key actions we've gotten here as a starting point, and then maybe revisit as part of the FY26 budget discussion. So
I'll just say on that we'll put a pin in it, and you'll all hear from me again in any budget surplus conversation about, whether we're able to afford a tree inventory because our neighbors are doing them, Fairfax are doing them, Town of Vienna are doing them, people are, investing in them, getting consultants or whatever in order to do it, to make sure that what they're planting makes sense, that it's varied, that it you know, all of those sorts of things, and that they're investing in their, the green aspects that are benefiting their jurisdictions, as much as other things, so.
Understood.
That's a question too. At the end there, it says, do not want to add, you're recommending not adding these initiatives due to concern about administrative sustainability. But that's longer term than just actually doing it, but is that what that means?
Using the tree inventory example, I think one of the things we need to spend some more time on internally is figuring out if we're going to pay a consultant to do a tree inventory for us. Part of a tree inventory is you have an inventory of all the trees on city property, and then you input information into that database as you make changes, as you do maintenance on those trees, as you plant new ones. Well, you got to have all of your business processes and staff bandwidth internally in order to be able to keep up that database. Otherwise, you pay somebody $100,000 to do it, and then 3 years later, it's not worth that much to you anymore because you weren't able to maintain it. So that's kind of what that bullet is referring to.
So it's a double concern, is the initial doing it and then the follow-up in the future. We just don't have that bandwidth at this point.
Yeah, and I would qualify it by saying it may not be just we need to add more staff. It might be we just need to kind of think through and putting together the processes and things to be able to maintain it. You know, so I wouldn't say it's just strictly, oh, we don't have enough people, but we're not set up to kind of maintain those things, is my assessment at this point.
And I can send more information around about it too, or ask Urban Forestry Commission to look, you know, into it in terms of what are involved. My understanding from the few times that this has come up, where the Urban Forestry Chair has addressed council about it, even before I was on council, has been that, you know, there are standards, right, that you're supposed to apply to these sorts of things, and regardless of how we're inventorying or maintaining logs of what it is we're doing now, and you obviously don't want someone's institutional knowledge to leave with them and have no records of what you're doing, but we are apparently very far behind whatever the industry standards are. Like our last tree inventory was something like 18 or 20 years ago, even though industry standards are that you're doing them, you know, every 9 years or something like that. So it's that sort of thing that in terms of when you're trying to gauge your own system, like what you should be doing per the experts in that whole field.
So are you recommending completely taking out number 4 for now?
No, we would keep the thing that's in there, update the tree canopy requirements for commercial and multifamily.
Okay, moving on, solid waste services. I think Wyatt referenced this one earlier. We didn't have any updates to the content in there. Does anybody have any questions on that one?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I continue to be very concerned about the way this is phrased. And there's another option not even considered here, which is adding multifamily homes, and not reducing services to single-family homeowners. I don't like the options here. I think they're too narrow. I think they're unnecessarily controversial. I don't mind looking at this, but I don't like the approach here. I don't like either option. I think it needs more work. And the pay as you throw, okay, maybe, but you're basically saying you can't or won't do it because it'll cost $200,000 more. I find that a little bit difficult to understand or to tolerate, and I don't like the first option at all. I mean, I got to say it again. You're taking away services. People are already paying high taxes, and you're, in essence, taking away a service. I think that will have a very negative impact on the whole effort here. So,
if I'm not,
I just need to say it again.
I understand the sentiment, but isn't that essentially option the one that's in line 165, where we'd add multifamily, and so in order to charge them,
You'd
have to reduce the tax rate and then
whatever you're paying for services, and then you pay separately for those.
It's just phrased differently, but we're not taking away service.
You you're requiring separate payments. So presumably your tax rate's gonna stay the same, but now if you want trash service, you gotta pay for that.
I would make the exact opposite assumption. If you're taking my trash services away, I'm no longer paying the tax rate equivalent of that, so and then you have to pay that to another, you have to write another check or send another payment, but I would absolutely disagree with, like, I see how you're reading it now, I didn't understand that before, I wasn't reading it that way, I was reading that you remove the trash, and you also reducing your tax rate by the equivalent.
Yes, and then you pay it out separately.
But not everybody would be paying.
Right, I think I understand it as, and I have similar concerns, and I've been, communicating these concerns, with respect to the Park Towers petition, but in a larger sort of way of what may make sense to bring residential multifamily buildings or, into this without crossing into service for commercial buildings or mixed-use buildings that necessarily went through like a special exception process and had VCs that were negotiated regarding, services that they were providing in exchange for increased benefits they were getting in terms of building things they wouldn't otherwise be able to build. But on balance, the issue is that, right, people are paying taxes now that include this service. You would decrease the tax rate, but overall, their out-of-pocket costs would likely increase because they would be assessed, and we'd probably have to have it as a mandatory assessment in order to have it as any sort of administrable program, and ultimately you'd be paying a higher cost than what you're currently paying. Is how I understand it and what I understand the concern to be, and why I have similar concerns about exactly what we're doing here and who we're trying to bring in.
Yeah, so without trying to solve this and get into actually the policy debate on this, it sounds like there's enough desire to tackle this one. And so whether it's the two courses laid out here, rephrasing of them to address Dave's concern of whether we're actually removing services or not from people, like, I think the input you're hearing from this one is keep on the plan. Is that right? And
I guess, Madam Chair, I've been newly sort of interested in this topic because parents with young children tend to generate a lot of trash, and you're in essence going to be penalizing people for having children. So I don't think that's a good idea either. So that's why I'm saying there are lots of, I don't mind looking at this, but I have concerns about the way this could be understood or misunderstood in the public. So I don't want to sign off on these courses of action. I don't mind continuing to work on this.
so line 64, or 164, instead of saying there's these two potential courses of action, I think merits probably more discussion on the different ways we could tackle this. There's probably more than just the two to address what you're hearing. Multiple courses of action.
So the takeaway then would be to simplify this in this document to say explore options to address the equity issues that have been raised and to incentivize, and potentially to incentivize more reduction of waste.
So we're not just boxed into those two options only, I think.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Yeah.
I think that makes sense.
And I agree continuing to work on this. I do.
Okay. Well, this is a useful discussion, and it is a preview of discussions we'll have when we have the scope of work, and we will continue to try to work through additional options in addition to just these two.
Because I do think the policy objectives, just refreshing back from the solid waste plan that we all adopted, was how do we get to zero waste eventually, right? And then how to be more equitable in how we are charging for the service across the city. So how to accomplish those two policy goals with this initiative.
Can I ask in terms of, this is a work plan item and staff resources, does it make sense to focus our efforts on the first option but expand kind of lines of inquiry in terms of what that would mean or potential, like a potential build out of something versus taking on this end of pay as you throw system? Like, how committed are people at this point to trying to implement, I guess, a pay-as-you-throw system versus an overall more equitable trash system. Like, I mean, if we're dedicating resources to this, I would like to, I guess, think critically and creatively about the first option, and what kind of cost and feasibility implications are, and kind of, you know, how you categorize different buildings, and who should have an expectation for getting certain services, and who maybe shouldn't have an expectation for receiving those services, right? Like, those are all policy and deep policy conversations in and of themselves. So for me, even focusing on the first one, but being able to engage more on this and not having the dual second strategy may make more sense. But
So
that
we
is food for
listed
thought.
the two for, was the thought process behind the two. The sort of option one sort of gets right at the equity issue, but doesn't address any broader environmental issues or other more subtle equity issues. Option two, pay as you throw, expands the potential of environmental benefit. That's the reason you do it. And it gets into different levels of equity. Now, those have cross implications. And we talked earlier about the equity lens of looking at the parking. We would need an equity lens at looking through all these price signals, and, you know, who's most impacted by that. And, you know, we'd want to have visibility on that. So that's option two is certainly more complex, but it does have that greater potential to really kind of move the needle on our recycling rate. And now, third options are, you know, we haven't found great ones yet under state code. You know, there were some examples of just providing a tax abatement for multifamily, for those condo owners. That would be really simple, and probably it would be expensive, but you know, the bands of discussion of that are pretty limited. We don't think under Virginia law there's a pathway for that. We could explore that some more. And then another option is to provide the service for multifamily. And we've not explored the ramifications of that because that's a fairly complex conversation. Not crazy complex, but it's complex enough that we haven't just dove into it. So I guess the point is there are some other options that we can explore, but I think when we really get into it, we're probably going to be wrestling with these two that are laid out here. And I know that you know, those can be difficult, and they affect, you know, basically everybody in the city. So it's a high band.
Yeah, I think it's important also to have conversations about equity and what we mean about equity in this context. You know, you're talking about equity in terms of people and systems they're paying into, or you're talking about equity in terms of like buildings. Normally we don't talk about like buildings themselves as equity issues. We talk about like impacts on people in buildings and why a service would apply, you know, certain ways in certain buildings based on other like contractual obligations or whatever else, you know, that's at play. And so I think you and I have gone back, for example, on this issue of single family townhomes, you know, versus multifamily or commercial. I look at things in a, you know, what are distinctions you can make, residential versus commercial, residential not subject to an SE where, you know, someone came in and got benefits and part of their commercial benefits are voluntary concessions and whatever else. So maybe they're in a separate box from other multifamily. So to me, having a broader discussion on council generally around this issue also makes sense in terms of like how we're categorizing things and thinking about things. Because I know we've been engaging in earnest on this and we have different perspectives. That like, you know, I can understand, but I don't see the same way or wouldn't, you know, slice or dice the categories the same way. So, you know,
Well, how
it will
about-
be its own topic, I get that, but I just mean in terms of framing the conversation for feedback.
For the purpose of this document, we'll simplify the language, and the next time we'll talk about this, will be in the context of a scope of work for some additional consulting help to work through these issues with data and with good sound process.
Sounds good.
Okay. Any other questions, comments on the environmental sustainability topic? So we'll move on to transportation, and we'll jump down to number 7, which is the completing the bicycle master plan. So we've added 2 bullets to this one, I think, to, you know, better articulate what happens after the bullets we included previously. So those being kind of refined design options with additional public engagement specific to the priority routes that'll come out of a bicycle master plan that'll be coming to you all, I think, next work session in August. And then, you know, prioritizing implementing the east-west connection to the secondary school campus and further develop possible West Street priority routes in FY26.
On that one of the concerns I've heard is the traffic calming, which I think we have some email traffic and some site visits, so thank you for being responsive to the Southwest neighborhood. We don't have implementation dollars allocated to any of the bike routes, correct?
That's correct.
So after we adopt the plan in September, we need to figure out how we're going to implement some of these, or is that like a budget amendment item, or is that going to have to wait a full?
I think that's what we were thinking.
We're thinking a fall budget amendment, and we're hoping to be timely for that, and that's what we're working towards.
Great, thank you.
I guess, what's the name of the document where you see the timelines for when these things?
The Gantt chart?
It's Gantt, okay, I'm gonna forget it every time, but I'll get it someday. Gantt, okay. I guess it's kind of like the CEAP and the GOEP plans. I mean, I imagine that those are just sort of ongoing. I mean, if you look at those plans, it's ongoing for the foreseeable future. I would expect that the bicycle master plan is also ongoing for the foreseeable future. Is there, I think I've raised this before, but I just want to make sure it's like not like we get 1 bike lane or 2 bike lanes and we're like, okay, we're good, and that this is something that keeps going. And so not specifically clear from the key actions in this document, but making sure that this is an ongoing thing that continues beyond getting the east-west connection and that process.
Sure. I mean, I think the bicycle master plan goes into the library of a lot of, you know, kind of planning documents we have in the city that'll guide kind of future actions that we take on street projects, on buildings, and so so that's kind of where it resides and how it helps us going forward. I think what we've laid out here is for this council, you know, 2-year work plan, that these are the things that we think we can accomplish in this time period. So that's kind of why it's kind of framed up the way it is.
Okay, so actually, so what I'm hearing is that it's only these 3 streets, the northwest, southwest, and then route to school would be accomplishable in the next 2 years.
I think that's yes. And I think that's ambitious, but yes, that's what we're going to try and do.
Okay, that's helpful to know. I would be in favor of making sure that, you know, on the Gantt chart or whatever it is we're doing, that we do show that there's considerable amount of dedication to this throughout the next 2 years. But I guess, yeah, I think a lot of people want to see progress on getting bike lanes, and so I think maybe 3 routes in 2 years feels a little bit small, but as long as while that work is going on, we can still be planning for the future for additional routes.
Understood. I think we have 2 folks on staff in our planning department focused on transportation, and that runs the gamut from, you know, the bus rapid transit to the neighborhood traffic calming program and everything in between. We have 2 transportation engineers in public works that have to help provide input on all of these things, from sidewalks to the visibility requests, that are feeding into some of the rapid response crew work that's being implemented. There's a lot of interest in the community for us to do more and more. I just, want to caution, on our capacity, to do all of this, right? Like, I think we're kind of pushing the envelope here over the next couple months with what we're trying to get done. And so I'll share that, right? Like, that's when I say, like, to get these 3 bike lane projects kind of done over the next 2 years is a heavy lift, particularly in the context of all the other things that are being asked of staff in this body of work.
Good. Thank you.
I know it's disappointing to hear no, because I heard no on the stormwater retention stuff, so I know we want to get more than the 3, but I'm hearing 3 for now, and then we'll have to get to the other ones later. So good job on pushing back and saying that to us, Andy.
Yeah. I don't like it, but trying to be, straight with it too. Okay. The ADA transition plan number 8 on line 250. I think kind of following up on some comments to, hey, what's next after this? So after that plan's completed, we would incorporate those recommendations into future projects such as sidewalk, streetscape, and building improvement projects. Moving on to number 10. So implement adjustments to streetscape standards through engineering and administrative solutions. So I think the discussion we had on this one a few weeks ago was, I think Councilmember Conley maybe brought this one up on, hey, could we do the brick sidewalks first, right? And I think right now we've actually just implemented the first kind of pilot of the crosswalk solution. So the crosswalk that's gone in at Oak and Broad Street, if you all have seen that, that's not real brick. That's an engineered solution for that we got put in as a kind of a no-cost pilot.
I was surprised. I thought it was just going to get a white crosswalk. I was surprised it got even any sort of pavers or stamped concrete.
So it's so it's a solution that the team came up with, looking at some of the other, Virginia jurisdictions that have done something similar. We've got a little homework to kind of close that out as a pilot and kind of ensure it's going to hold up and things like we want it to. I think, talking with Zach last week, I think we can look to, I think it was Culpeper, but there's a couple jurisdictions that have done these a couple years ago, so we can kind of see how their crosswalks are wearing kind of with traffic and but I feel pretty confident this will be something we can do. So the brick crosswalk piece is kind of already in the works, I guess is my point. And so the brick sidewalk piece is more complicated. So the brick crosswalks, there's like a solution out there that kind of aesthetically looks the same and doesn't don't even know if somebody didn't tell you, right? At least initial discussions with staff is the brick sidewalk one's not quite that simple. It might involve making some more changes to kind of have the appearance of things that at least our assessment's going to involve some kind of more community discussion. And so that's why we've kind of prioritized the 2 of these the way that we have.
So I still want to push back on that one. I feel like we've got number 8 is about the ADA transition plan, and number 9 is complete streets of Vision Zero. And this sidewalk is part of all of that. And I just don't see that it's that hard to do, that we have to pilot something. We have lots of sidewalks, and the ones that are brick are dangerous to people who are in wheelchairs or walking because they're uneven. We're putting in sidewalks at Wallace, and we can't even put like little tiny engraving on more than 8 of them because it makes it too uneven. So I just don't think there's that much need for community discussion. It's an ADA accessibility safety issue related to complete streets and Vision Zero. And some people like how brick sidewalks look, but it's dangerous. So that is and if we don't do it before FY26, we're going to end up with brick sidewalks outside of the Quinns project because that's in the plan. So I'm just really concerned that this one, I know staff wants to put in a pilot and all that, but it just seems like it's a much simpler solution than having to do a pilot and run it by the community. It's pretty simple to say, we can't do this anymore. This is dangerous. This doesn't work.
I mean, just to add on to that, especially at the Quinns, it's a senior facility. If you've tried to move a roller, a rollator, or a wheelchair, or walk with a cane over the brick sidewalks, you find very quickly how difficult they are. And this whole development is going to be servicing seniors. So to think of it as a health and safety issue. But were you saying that the crosswalk, I mean, that's a pilot of that technology? Like the one that's already been put in Oaken Rock, right? I mean, that's pilot, it'd be the similar tech stamped brick look. So we have a pilot in essence. I mean, I know it should be even sturdier because it's being driven over versus by large trucks all day long versus a wheelchair or whatever.
Is it just an aesthetic issue, or like what is it about brick sidewalks that we're worried about? Non-brick sidewalks that look like brick.
So, and would have to get the public work folks, I think, to Councilmember Hiscott's point on what they've done for the crosswalk isn't translatable to the sidewalks for whatever reason, right? I think the way we've kind of thought about this to date is that we needed to maintain the aesthetic quality, if you want to use that term, of brick sidewalks, and trying to figure that out is more complicated. Now, if the council's signaling something different that says, just get rid of brick sidewalks and go to concrete sidewalks as the standard in the city, I would agree. We wouldn't necessarily need to have a bunch of community engagement, do pilots, and all of that. But our sense is that there would be some community interest in that, right? So that's why we teed it up the way we have. If the direction from you all is something different, then we can take that back and figure that out.
I mean, I think if we went back and looked at the public comments, at least for the 4 years that I've been here, about brick sidewalks versus not brick sidewalks, we haven't had anybody come in and say, hey, I don't want you to change the brick sidewalks out, even though they're more dangerous or freeze up or all the other issues we've had. We haven't gotten public comments saying don't change. We've gotten many, many public comments year after year to change them for health and safety reasons. And it has been shared that other jurisdictions athletically have been able to handle still maintaining the small city look by doing the stamped brick sidewalks. So you can still have that visual differentiation that, you come into Falls Church City, you're no longer in Fairfax County, you come into our little city and you see that differentiation, but you can see it and you can still roll your wheelchair over it. So, I don't know if anybody else has any other comments.
I would like to get the sidewalks too. So one other idea for a pilot. So in our consent agenda, we're approving contracts for the pocket parks that are recommending brick pathways in those parks. So it is in our control for 3 parks that are about to be built. Like, is that another place where we could pilot some stamped concrete paver-looking things as a proxy for what sidewalks could do before that project gets underway, so that we have more data and can assess whether we can move to an alternative to brick sidewalk sooner than later?
We could take that back. I
don't want to change the project and then delay the parks further, but
that's the trick, right? And we're finally at a point where we're rewarding contracts, and to now make a change, like there's a consequence to that, right? So,
which is why I think Mary Beth's been pushing for so long of changing our policy so that we catch more projects, right? Because I think we're just going to run the risk of every time we delay it, we're just going to have more projects come through and then not be able to catch those. So that's the thrust of this. It's not to slow down projects, but try to catch more of them, knowing that the policy intent is to make it more accessible and safe and at a lower maintenance cost.
And at one point in time, I don't know if it still is, but it was a cheaper installation cost as well versus manually doing brick by brick by brick, pouring concrete in and stamping and mass, or at least larger sections of it. This should be cheaper than installing brick. It was at one point in time, I haven't looked at the numbers, I don't know buy that. Cost savings and health improvement and maintenance reduction.
Any other opinions about this?
Well, maybe just one more opinion. I think our thinking is for the crossings, we can issue that memo and it's not going to be controversial and we will roll. The sidewalks, we're going to probably have some options, and I have a feeling it's going to we're projecting, and we could be wrong about this, that is going to be quite a big discussion on what those options would look like. I think people are going to feel quite passionate about that. That's why we're asking for more time on it.
When you say options, you're saying like, I don't know, I don't envision, I'm probably like any home improvement project, you have 500 options, but you think you just want a white wall, then we'll hear the 500 whites. Is that what you mean? Like, instead of saying, I mean, in my mind, like, you make a stamped brick that looks like a brick. That's the brick that we have throughout the city already. It's, 2 inches by 8 inches, or whatever the dimensions are, and it's the same color. I'm missing something with that.
Well, we'll look at the looks of those. I think a lot of people would say they're really unattractive. I mean, I know people have that view, and so I think that's what we have to work through.
I just think if we start with the existing brick standards are not acceptable anymore. Aesthetically, they don't always look nice even. I mean, outside of the Harris Teeter, they're brick and they're all jumbledy, and so they may look nice to start out, but they don't hold up and they don't look nice. So if we say the existing brick is not acceptable anymore, then what's the option? Just regular old concrete? Or
that's what we want to work through, and I think
Right.
we want to do better than just the regular old concrete. So then, what's the spec? And I think what we're saying is that's going to take a little bit of thinking and probably some sort of a process to getting to the right answer. Unless you all want to say, whatever the planners and the engineers work out, we are going to defend it to the against whatever anybody says about it. Then that would be a very quick process. But that's not what our experience has been.
so then I guess my request is, it's a health and safety issue. There's not 500 options for sidewalk. There's 3, 6, whatever. So I'm pushing back against how far out it is because of projects that are already in the pipeline that are dependent upon a change to this. So that really is my specific request, is that in the Quinn's voluntary concessions, it says they'll do whatever we tell them to do, whatever the streetscape standard is at the time that they get to site approval or wherever it is in the process. So maybe we can look back from there and make sure that whenever we expect that one to come through and be approved, we have a new standard in place.
Yeah.
And if that is not till 2026, then okay, but I think it's going to be sooner than that.
I think you're right about that. So the site plan is going to be going through the process here shortly. And I'm just wondering whether for that project specifically, if we had a small team of a planner and engineer to work through some solutions with their architect and see if we couldn't just focus on that project as a way to work through a solution for the here and now, and then we're going to learn from that, and then we carry that, then we arrive at our standard. Maybe the time we adopt the full-blown standard is along this time frame, but in advance of that, we have some work on the Quinn site plan specifically.
That's a good idea. We can take that back to the team, see what we can do.
So do you envision, I guess I'm just thinking about, to Mary Beth's point about, are we in agreement that changes need to happen for health and safety? That's the first question. Because if not, and you put out, if you put out a community discussion that leaves it all open without consideration for health and safety and well-being, then it's, the people who care about keeping bricks the same are the ones who show up. Like 90% of people are not going to pay attention to it. So, what are you envisioning as a community engagement or involvement? I think
I like the idea of leveraging the resources with Quinn's to figure out a good option there.
It's a good idea.
I guess, so that's a good solution for Quinn's. Now, the West Broad project has about 1 billion more bricks than Quinn's does. They're gonna be going in real soon. I think that's a tough one to get that one changed by the time, because they're gonna be putting streetscape in very shortly.
Oh, West Broad.
The West Falls.
West Falls.
Yeah, I think the ship sailed on that one.
Right. I feel like those are both sort of,
Learning and lots of experience for the senior center there in my mind.
yeah.
And see.
Now, they, okay, all right, so we'll focus on Quinn's and then move forward.
Is that also just like a maintenance issue? So like West Falls, for example, all the brick sidewalks that are going in terms of ongoing maintenance, that responsibility is falling to,
West Falls.
yeah. So then does that mean that, you know, something like where you have the jumble of bricks outside the Harris Teeter or, you know, West Falls, that it's more of a, in time, follow-up in terms of like what responsibilities exist as to the property owner and needing to properly maintain, you know, what's there versus what are our own issues and resource constraints of being able to maintain those things that we're responsible for. So, I mean, you know, it has its own, like, we need to address the issue, but we also need to get on top of those places that should be addressing the issue for us because there are health and safety concerns of people living here if the property isn't properly maintained.
I think starting with the more recent projects, we had stronger maintenance agreements for the streetscape by the private property owners. The original mixed-use developments did not have those in place.
That's right.
So that's also the issue.
Harris Teeter did not have that maintenance agreement model for the 301 West Broad project.
Okay, appreciate the discussion on that one. So number 11 is an ad based on our discussion a few weeks ago. So support more micro-mobility travel options in the city. So the goal is to expand transportation choices and reduce reliance on automobiles. You know, and the key actions that we've laid out for this, and we've tried to kind of sequence this after some of the other things that we're focusing on this fall. But kind of look around industry trends and current best practices from other jurisdictions. Amend the city ordinance with respect to shared mobility, scooters and e-bikes specifically, and then develop policy on ways to support and encourage the safe use of low-speed electric vehicles, golf carts, on city streets.
So the only, thank you for adding that. That looks great. The only thing that I saw missing here was specifically scooters, e-bikes. Another shared mobility option is car sharing. And so Arlington just issued an ordinance for that. And so incorporating car share in addition to scooters and e-bikes is something that I would like to see.
There's probably examples nearby. Yeah. People doing it, so hopefully it's a lower lift for us to.
Yep. We'll add that. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Sounds good. I think on economic development, we'll jump down to number 14, complete and maintain city features that help deliver an attractive sense of place. So we deleted the first bullet based on the discussion from a few weeks ago. And then we've added 2 new ones focused on soliciting ideas from staff and boards and commissions on additional placemaking features, and then key retail and civic uses that the city should advocate for in future commercial development. Does that sound good? Number 15, develop a plan for the Gordon Road Triangle. It includes a long-term solution for the city's property yard. So 2 key changes here. So the public engagement level with this one ultimately is going to be an empower through a voter referendum that would be needed to do that project. And then we added a bullet on key actions that kind of playing out over the next 2 years to assess public safety and other community needs that could potentially be met at the property yard site. It's that time of day.
The projector back on.
And since this was last discussed, we've been informed by the Urban Land Institute that we are in the COG program, so we will have that TAP, that Technical Assistance Panel, this fall. We're excited about that.
Okay, moving on to 16, provide parking requirements. Okay, this one's fresh in everybody's mind, right? For existing commercial buildings. I think we also discussed a few weeks ago an initiative focused on promoting shared parking. And I think, you know, the discussion last time is like, you know, kind of what does that look like and what is the staff action on that? So we'll look to promote shared parking as opportunities arise, but weren't recommending at this point to create an initiative focused on that.
One for future discussion, which you know, what they raised at this point 5 years ago, is helping people navigate to the available public parking. So I know we've done wayfinding as kind of the 1.0 version, but there's really cool technology out there, like Arlington piloted the Smart Cities thing, where you can actually go look at a map and figure out here's all the available spaces in a particular part of the city. We are small enough that we should be able to do something like that. Like imagine you get a map of Falls Church and you could actually see where the available public parking spaces are and just go there as opposed to having to drive around. So I just don't want to lose sight of cool technology like that, especially if we are going to be piloting smart cities, you know, traffic signals, right? Like there's other ways to.
We also have parking meters and technology as part of that grant as well, targeting the parking garages at West Falls, but also trying to tie it into our public parking. That's just not a component of the grant we've gotten to yet, but it won't get lost because it is part of.
Because I think again, we looked at the Walker study, we have the parking, we just need to help people get to it, right? This is one where technology should be our friend here.
Good thoughts. Thank you. Okay, shifting gears to housing. So based on feedback from a few weeks ago, we've deleted place eligible persons in the 99 new affordable dwelling units. We'll get that done, right? But we won't track it here on this part of this process. We added a paragraph in starting on line 440 that articulates more about the affordable living policy. So this effort sets out city policy and objectives for preserving and expanding affordable housing choices in the city. This includes housing for people at different phases in life, including starter homes, first-time home buyers, and greater support aging in place for seniors. Okay, so then we'll jump back.
Can I
down
go
to,
back one page? Sorry.
Oh, sure.
So, when I looked at this, you know, we say preserving and expanding affordable housing choices. I was like, oh, preserving, and then I forgot, well, it's the affordable housing choices, but it's on 411 with the preserve the affordable housing for no net loss of units in the city. And Letty had also raised this when we first looked at this, that we reference on 412 and 413 only the tax credits, but we should have among this also the sunsetting ADUs. So, yeah, so if there's, it should be reflected somewhere.
So revise, you know, that section on 41213 to reflect sunsetting ADUs, okay?
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
That comment was made, so we didn't make that addition.
So then I think that takes us to the end, and we've got, you know, 2 additions under good governance. The first of which you all talked about, I think 3 weeks ago. We've just added it to this document on build upon current practices for transparency in city land development processes. And then 26 is the other new one, I think, based on your feedback. Review and update city financial policies. So city financial policies provide a strategic framework for financial planning and management and apply generally accepted best practices in the Falls Church context. So two key actions: review and update city's existing financial policies, last updated in 2018, and review staff recommendations for changes to those policies. And then the second, update the governance for the Affordable Housing Fund. And I think we also, you know, in the last paragraph also talked about some regular financial reporting to help improve visibility and understanding of various aspects of kind of our financial picture, revenues, status of ARPA, grant drawdowns, capital reserves, and the like. And so we'll work on that, in coordination with the Budget and Finance Committee.
Questions?
We skipped over this one in good governance, but on the facilities chapter of the comprehensive plan, which also was sort of a planning document for sanitary sewer capacity and things like that, I did want to make an announcement. We did get notice from Arlington County that they have approved their request to expand their boundaries so that we have the option of the Quinn project and other city center projects pumping to the Arlington County sewer shed. So that's one thing I wanted the council to be aware of. I'll share that correspondence from Arlington County with the council.
That's good news. Thank you. Final thoughts, Justine?
I know that we can't keep adding things to this, so just wanted to acknowledge one thing that didn't make it on that we could potentially put a pin in for the next 2-year cycle is as a liaison to both the Planning Commission and AAB, Architectural Advisory Board, both were interested in having some sort of design guidelines. And so while that's not here in this manifestation, I would like to have that top of mind when we do go through this process again. And perhaps there are ways for the community, as we talk about flower baskets and what businesses we want in the city, maybe there's, not to add more things, but ways for people to imagine what the city could look like in other ways as we go through the next couple of years.
Is there a way that we could outsource that to the AAB? Like, are there examples of really good design guidelines out there that we could adopt or look at examples of? Kind of like the Complete Streets stuff where we're like, let's not rewrite the whole policy. Let's just go adopt Complete Streets because people have done it, right?
There was some interest, or there is somebody, I'm blanking on the name of the person on the AAB who isn't a voting member, but he said that he has research on design guidelines from other places that he would be willing to share because I guess he did some research in university on this. Anyway, so maybe that could even be a smaller volunteer effort that could go through the AAB. And so.
Like if they, pull out like, here are 3 examples that we've seen that are really great and we should, update our design guidelines from the 90s, to that one. That could be a good precursor to when we take this on.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So maybe if there are, and I can bring that up with the AAB, but maybe if there are smaller ways we can consider it as we go about our duties. I do have a question, and maybe I can submit it via email, but if there's a way to get an answer to this, would the public facilities manual that's mentioned as a potential thing that would need to be funded, but that's part of this process, I'd like to know if that includes residential design guidelines, things like width of sidewalks, things like shy zone from sidewalks. Prince William has a 2 feet shy zone, meaning you can't put a fence right next to the sidewalk. So having Prince William has 2 feet shy zone for any sort of object next to the sidewalk zone. And so I'd like to know if there are residential design guidelines or streetscape design guidelines as part of a public facilities manual. And that would be maybe a question for Zach.
I don't know exactly, so I think that we need to get back.
Yeah, we need to take that back.
Okay.
I want to say yes, but there could be a lot of things in the public facilities manual. It's intended to be for all new development in the city, whether it's city development or private residential or commercial development, how they interact with the city government and sidewalks and streets and sewer connections, and it's all of those kinds of things. So, so we'll take it as a question to get back to you.
Thank you. That's all.
So I just have a broader question on, now that we've gone through this 3 times now, I think, since our retreat, how should we expect to regularly either review, track, celebrate progress? Is it moving to the Gantt chart dashboard update? Like, it sounds like some projects will come back to us for a scope of work to check for alignment before staff starts working on them. But then regularly, do we expect to go back to that quarterly cadence of updates to council? What are y'all thinking?
I think a quarterly update is what we have in mind is that we would do. And in addition to that, these things are going to be coming before you as actual policy action items. So I think that's how you will see progress on these.
Okay. And the quarterly update would be in the form of the dashboard like we used to have, like here's a status of this?
We haven't designed it yet. And so we'll get back with you on that.
I guess if council has input on that, to give guidance of like, hey, here's things I really care about getting updates on, or is it status, is it roadblocks, is it red, yellow, green, like, you know, there are a bunch of former executives and project managers in the room who are used to looking at things like this, so we probably have favorites out there.
So we'll work on it.
Saving that for something else.
So do you all have feedback on the format that we've used previously?
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
This group has thoughts.
Yeah, we have thoughts. Is that, you know, do we send you an email? Do we want to have a discussion and whiteboard it?
Maybe we'll start with, you know, if you have thoughts and you want to email them in to me, and then and then if warranted, or, you know, if it makes sense for a few of us to get together and talk about it, I'd be happy to do that.
Great. Thank you. Okay, anything else on work plan?
Thinking council charades. It's like, what am I doing? Riding a bicycle. Can we talk about this?
So there are 26 things on this list then. Are we at 26?
We're at 26.
Where did we decide to do the single-use plastics in the electric mowing?
It was more at the very end. There's
So the mowing fits as, I think, as a bullet under the government operations energy plan. Single plastics, it doesn't fit anywhere exactly. So why don't we have that one as staff's going to follow up on that. I think there's just a few things to think through on that. It's not super complicated, but how do we communicate it? What's the consequence if you break it? This moral suasion.
There's like you don't go like all or nothing, right? There's probably like some things where it's easier to start with, and then we build comfort with that first, right? Where you say there's absolutely no single-use plastics at Memorial Day, like that would be upsetting for people, maybe, or hard to do.
But yeah, start to prepare people and those kind of things. So 26, and some of them are shorter than others. One of them we're almost ready to check off with the parking. So
yeah, that was your takeaway from tonight. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yes, I think it's a mix. Some of them are, you know, simpler than others, but I think it's an ambitious list for the next. I know everybody there's desire for others, but there's it's an ambitious list of things to get done.
So that was the reason we didn't produce the Gantt chart, you know, in the format that we've used in the past, is that kind of our observation was that the council kind of didn't really get into it. Like, you know, it was, that presentation was a little bit tough for the council to really feel invested in. And so as we come up with one, we want one that's, we're in a much better starting place because it's easier to get invested in a body of work that you can get your mind around pretty quickly. So we're a big step ahead of where we were. And then just the presentation of it, we'll work through some options. If people have some thoughts, we'd love to get them. But we want to keep it simple, but also have it be resonant as a communications device.
Great. Are we ready to move on to the consent package?
We've got a good list of consent items, and that's because we're at the beginning of a fiscal year, and so a lot of these things go into motion with the new budget. Rather than sort of walking through them all, are there questions on any of them? We could handle it that way.
I had a question. I was just wondering, I guess this was for the VSA contract with Equipment Works for truck and body and equipment for heavy equipment. What, and this maybe Zach has to answer this, but what is that exactly? It sounds like it's an attachment for a car or a truck for a snowplow. And I was wondering, is this I know we already have F550s that have attachments already, and so I was wondering what sort of plows and what sort of attachment this would be.
So, so you're correct. These are for attachments for trucks that we already have, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're not actually buying any vehicles with
Right.
this. It's just kind of equipment. So the strategy that Zach and Herb developed a few years ago to help replace our really bad emissions kind of fleet of trucks, was to move to a switch and go, what they call a switch and go platform, to be able to trade out the equipment that sits on the back of the truck so we can use them more year round.
Mm-hmm.
So this purchase is intended to help kind of fill out that equipment so we don't need to use some of those older trucks anymore. And I believe this equipment's specific to snow treatment, so brine and salt, to put that on the streets, during snow season.
I guess I was just, and so I can either submit this via email or, but I guess the question that I have is this for one of our CDL trucks? That's a switch and go, or is it for the F550 trucks? And yeah, so what sort of truck would this be going on? And so if you don't have that answer, I'd like to know.
We would have to take that back. My sense is these are the I don't even know if 550 is the right one, but these are the switch and go trucks, which I don't believe
those are, yeah, so those are the
I don't believe these are CDL trucks.
Oh, you don't believe, okay.
I don't think so.
Okay.
But is your interest the width of the plow?
Yeah.
So I don't think that's part of this procurement, but we'll get back with you on that if that's.
Yeah. My guess is that that's not part of this, but I was just generally interested in more information, and especially since I now have a categorization of the different types of snowplows we have, or just wondering which category this procurement fit into. And then also,
I think the headline on this one though is the brine treatment capacity in the switch and go platform.
Gotcha. Okay. And it would be $130,000 per year going forward, or
This is an equipment purchase. This is a one-time purchase.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Erin?
I, two questions on two different items. I've raised this before on the Merrifield Garden Services contract that relates to the parklets. Can you confirm in terms of any remediation that might need to take place because of the location of those parklets adjacent to planned construction areas? Yeah, both in terms of the Tinner Hill Alley one, which may not actually be part of this procurement yet, but when that one comes up, because it's adjacent to the actual construction site, and then for the one that is on here along with South Maple, the Annandale Triangle, it seems like most of that is far enough up from where the sewer connector will be at East Fairfax that it shouldn't disrupt that parklet once it's constructed. But I just want to make sure that if we're using ARPA funds and constructing that their dollars well spent, in that any disruption that may occur would actually get remediated for that parklet if there were disruptions from the hookup that has to happen at that triangle of East Fairfax and Annandale, like the South Washington, Annandale, East Fairfax.
So the question isn't about the contract, it's about the agreement with Quinn's on what work they would do?
For me, the authorization kind of rolls into, we're authorizing the use of the funds, and I just want to make sure that the funds are well spent, in that to the extent that the project is like dug up in 3 years, that it's remediated without additional public dollars going into it.
Definitely be remediated if it did disturb it. I did ask the question on this item, and I don't believe there are conflicts.
Okay.
But your point is well taken.
Okay.
Like spending something to make it real nice and then dig it up. you know,
Yeah.
like 2 years later for the vote.
Yeah, okay. And then the other point is that we had some public comment just about short notice or, not receiving timely notice on different improvements. And so for the Fairfax water fire hydrants, I would just ask that as that work is done, that we're communicating in a timely way with affected streets about whatever water shutoff may happen.
Oh, well, that will definitely happen. Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
And it's funnily enough, there is people care a lot where these fire hydrants go, and so there's a requirement for a little bit of coordination on that, because you can't park in front of them.
Other consent questions? I just had that one about the brick sidewalks in our new pocket parks. If it does not derail the projects, it would be great to look at alternatives, given all the discussion.
Jim Snyder's involved in these parklets. This is going to be tough, I'm telling you.
Pavers look great. Like, I just hate to put in a new public park that, anyway,
Agree.
that
And-
horse is beaten to death, so.
But it also does look at the Berman Park Trail crossings are stamped concrete. The D. So the Berman Park one is the one that we started talking about in 2019, maybe before the pandemic, and that one seems like it's ready to go.
That's interesting, yeah. I'll have to
But
follow.
it says stamped concrete on the
Maybe using the same kind of look as the.
Oh, because it's Ryan, it's the same PM for the WNOD trail crossings. Maybe that's.
Oh, there you go. Maybe that's it. Yep.
That's good that we're changing it there. Okay. Okay, I don't hear any other final things. Do we want to move to other council comments or other discussion items?
Madam Mayor, something that I know you've been involved with, Cindy, and I've been involved with. The Metro announced a proposal for altering the bus routes, and 28A, which is probably the most used bus route, certainly in Virginia and one of the most in the region, their proposal would eliminate a stop at West Falls Church, which is beyond comprehension. So Cindy drafted public comments. I was less diplomatic with the Metro representatives at NVTC on the record Thursday night, and was even less diplomatic the next day at the opening of the groundbreaking for the east entrance at Crystal City. So the point's been driven home, and I know we'll all be following up in our various capacities. I mean, with all the new residences and all the new businesses and all the development, including Metro development there, why they would eliminate a stop there, I have no idea. So anyway, the message has been delivered in multiple ways, and we'll keep it up. But thanks for your comments, and thanks, Cindy. Drafted some good comments that were submitted, and that I've been on both on the record and privately making the point. So anyway, I just wanted to report on that. Unbelievable.
Especially since that's supposed to be the pilot for the BRT.
Yeah.
Right, like it doesn't make sense. So I guess Cindy and Dave, what would be helpful from the council?
Following up on the conversations that Mr. Snyder had with our Virginia legislative rep, they've committed to giving us in writing the why. So once we have the why, then I think we'll do some more proactive follow-up, so that before the WMATA board vote, we see if they made a change on the recommendation based on the public input.
Well, let's follow up with Metro.
Yep.
And then if we're not getting the right answer, then I think we ratchet up the communications. May reach out to our legislative delegation and, make the point that with all the new residents, first of all, they're missing customers, and they're missing service to a very exciting new area, so, yeah.
I know you can make contact with our Virginia board members, so we can do some advanced work.
Yeah.
All of those points were in the written comments. It's now to get it executed.
Great, we'll keep us posted.
I just want to announce that, just a heads up that I'll be headed to the annual retreat for Council of Governments, and just a little bit of a heads up on what the agenda is, because they just shared it. It's a Friday, Saturday thing. They're talking about economic development districts, designation, and the whole process and the benefits are. They're sharing regional public safety and crime data, transit coordination and governance. Oops, thank you. And then looking at, of interest is examining sources of new revenue for regional transit. So I'll be taking notes, and Cindy, I'll probably connect with you afterwards.
Sure. Yeah, very active in the DMV moves, and the state kicked off their joint study on WMATA today, so I'm sure it'll all tie into your COG retreat.
Thank you for going to that.
Presenting on the economic overlays, and they're doing some really creative, interesting innovation.
I don't.
District down by
Yeah.
new Virginia Tech Innovation Campus.
I don't see Arlington
They're doing
presenting
some
in here. I'll be
interesting
sure.
work. I'd like to learn more about how we can maybe of interest in if it's with the Gordon Road or could
We
be.
talked about a field trip as part of the Golden Road. I think that field trip.
I know some others did, but I just heard some partial presentation on their
I'd like to hear
innovation
more.
with the district, and I don't know enough to share right now.
Well, I'll talk to Libby. She'll be there. So, okay.
Anything else?
So the Public Utilities Commission meeting this week is Wednesday night, and it says it's a kickoff to the comprehensive plan amendment. I don't see documents that are linked to the agenda. Like, I haven't read that. That's the kickoff to every for a whole. Then that council.
So the kickoff,
What's that?
this,
Flow of how that's gonna work, so I can be prepared before I show up, and I'm explaining the flow.
we're planning a kickoff with council on August 4th. And, but I'll check in terms of what the plan is with the PUC.
That's on the agenda, as well as the stormwater code update that we spent quite a lot of time on in here. Just trying to prepare for that meeting appropriately. I can follow up with you offline. Just so you all know that the PUC will be looking at that. And then the ESC will be talking about parking Thursday.
I had a request. So I think we've had a number of either pet accidents or car accidents on various streets, and I think staff's in the process of evaluating various intersections. So Hillwood comes to mind, Cherry, Park West, and the WNOD. Nolan Sidewalks has been on the list for evaluation, so I don't need the update now, but I think it'd be great to get a more comprehensive update on how those four, and there may be a fifth one in there, the status of those evaluations and any recommended changes to either signals or signage or improvements based on what's happened. I think Nolan in particular was during the budget cycle, and I think we all kind of said we were not satisfied with FY28, which is when they were going to get funded, so we were hoping that we could advance that on the sidewalk list. And while we're on sidewalks, I think staff had also committed to getting a master sidewalk list by the end of the summer, both a missing links list as well as a repair list. So we're all still looking forward to that so that we can look at budget amendments and figure out where we can do additional work, because between safety on streets as well as sidewalks, I think those continue to be one of the top priorities we hear from residents.
On that one, I know Mr. Young has a meeting with Public Works and Planning. That's one of the items this week on their agenda.
Great. And then I was also going to make a plug for everyone to help find BOE candidates. That is going to start in about 2 months. and they're down to two. They're down to two, and ideally they have 5, but 3 would be great. So just one more. That's a really hard to fill board, but it's a critical one that starts in September. So, if you know people who are
Requires training and certification and state.
just appoint you officially, so there's some lead time with it. So anyone who would like to serve for a 4-month period to help look at tax appeals, important work.
We're also shy of retirement board member, and it's been a hard one to fill because there's also training and fiduciary responsibilities. So welcome any feelers out that for.
Is that a community member? A community member?
Community member. The retirement board is requesting some legal background because the member that's coming off had the legal experience. So while it's a general appointment, that's the focus that they're hoping for.
For the BOE, can we target people who appealed their taxes? But there's probably some other people.
There could be. I mean, that's how we did it last time, to target people.
So I don't know how we can get creative about recruiting. Or just put a sign up in the Commissioner of Revenue's office as you're paying a bill. Okay, that's it. Anything else? Okay, let's adjourn.
All right, thank you, council.
Yeah. An hour and 24 minutes to continue celebrating your birthday.
Yeah.
Eat my ice cream. To myself while everyone's asleep.
I could not get my teenagers to go to sleep these days before like 11.
Yeah, Wyndham's at camp. He's gone for 3 weeks. Wyndham's he's out by like 9.
You know, Oliver's working, and so he has to get up at 7. But I mean, because he's not driving himself, and they're not. I have to get maybe like this summer schedule, so I mean, he got. Well, he's getting his license. Hopefully, 1 class away from getting his license. So we